Distinguished leaders, respected leaders, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome everyone to attend the Sub-Forum Sustainable Trade Amid Climate Change of the 7th Hongqiao International Economic Forum. I'm the host today, Zhang Wei. I'm very honored to gather together with you at this beautiful season to start this inspiring forum to guarantee the operation of the meeting. Please remember to turn your mobile phone into silent mode. And we're about to welcome Miao Lu to host the opening ceremony, the opening keynote speech session. Let's welcome. Distinguished leaders, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all. Welcome everyone to attend the Sub-Forum Sustainable Trade Amid Climate Change of the 7th Hongqiao International Economic Forum. The CIIE International Economic Forum has been an important platform for discussing the international issues, seeking the sustainable development tools and solutions. When the climate change is intensifying in this forum, we are gathering the wisdom from all parties and then to talk about the green solutions for the whole world, to talk about global trade's role in adjusting the climate change with its important influence, seeking out the solutions for the future. And this forum is hosted by the MOFCOM as well as the CIIE Bureau as well as CCG. And at this forum, we have invited from around the world policymakers, business leaders, and expert scholars from multiple countries and regions to explore the future of sustainable trade in the context of global climate change. First of all, allow me to introduce all the guests who have spoken today one by one. Firstly, Mr. Harsko Lamy, former DG of the WTO and Vice Chairman of the Paris Peace Forum. Let's welcome. The former Deputy Minister of Commerce and former Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization, Mr. Yi Xiaozhun. Former Under-Secretary General of the UN and Executive Director of the UN Environment Program, Mr. Eric Soham. President of China Meteorological Service Association and former Deputy Director of China Meteorological Administration, Mr. Xu Xiaofeng. Deputy Secretary of the Party Committee and President of Bank of Communications, Mr. Zhang Baojiang. Member of the Standing Committee of the 12th National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, former Chairman and Party Secretary of Sinopec, Mr. Fu Chenyu, and Mr. Ragnar Udd, Chief Commercial Officer of BHP, Chief Executive Officer of PepsiCo Greater China, Ms. Anson, CEO of the European Policy Center, Mr. Fabian Zulek, Chief Economist of the International Federation of Talent Organizations, Mr. David Blair, General Manager of Wuliangye Co. Limited, Mr. Hua Tao, President of Cargill Agriculture and Trade Asia Pacific Group, Ms. Pankel, Global Vice President Baker Hanks, Alejandro Duran, Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainable Development Officer of JA Solar Technology, Mr. Sun Guanbing, Founding President of China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation, President of World Academy of Sustainable Development, Mr. Zhou Jingfeng, and also Wang Huiyao, the founder of the CCG. And please allow me to introduce today's special guests. His Excellency Dayan Horia Maxim, Romanian Ambassador to China, and Mr. Geraci, former Deputy Minister of Economic Development of Italy. And next, we'd like to give the floor to Mr. Wang Huiyao, founder and chairman of the Global Think Tank and the former counselor of the State Council, to deliver the opening speech for us. Let's welcome.
China and Globalization, I would like to extend the warmest welcome to all our distinguished guests and also all the participants today. As this is held in Shanghai, I'm going to deliver this welcome speech in Chinese. 尊敬的拉米先生
Distinguished Mr. Pascal Lamy, Honorable Minister Yi Xiaozhun, Distinguished Chairman Eric, Respected Director Xu Xiaofeng, Esteemed President Zhang Baojiang, Honorable Maximum, dear Mr. Jirachi, distinguished guests, experts, and friends from all walks of life, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 7th Hongqiao Forum session on sustainable trade and climate change. This year, CCG continues to co-host this forum with the CIIE Bureau. And here we are grateful for the strong support from the MOFCOM and the CIIE Bureau for their support and also for the insightful speeches that our distinguished guests will deliver later to share your insights and opinions on this topic. Here we've also invited top experts, scholars, and industry leaders from various countries and regions around the world to engage in in-depth discussions on topics such as China, US, EU, green cooperation, green industrial development, and the future of sustainable trade. And together, we aim to share innovative perspectives and offer recommendations for sustainable trade and green industrial development amidst the global climate shift. And we are very glad that today we're able to invite Pascal Lamy. Yesterday at Beijing, we held a very wonderful forum as well, together with Jack Lud and other experts from the international organizations. We talked about together with EPC's Chairman Fabian. So we had this forum, representatives from the think tanks at this event. And firstly, for the sub-forum today, we will start with the keynote speeches from 5 prominent guests, which we eagerly anticipate. Following that, we will have some roundtable sessions. We will engage in focused discussions on the themes of green cooperation from China, US, EU perspectives, and green industrial development, and prospects for sustainable trade. We look forward to hearing our insightful perspectives and exchanges. Additionally, at this sub-forum, CCG will also launch our latest report, latest findings at the forum on a sustainable trade agenda for global climate mitigation, prospects and challenges, and share our latest viewpoints with everyone. The CIIE is the world's first national-level exhibition focused on imports, and it has been held for 7 consecutive years. Over the past 6 sessions, nearly 2,500 new products, newly launched technologies and services made their global debut here, with a cumulative intended transaction volume exceeding 420 billion. More than 1,130 foreign invested enterprises and investment promotion organizations have visited various locations in China for targeted matchmaking, leading to the establishment of new stores, factories, and R&D centers. So, as we can see, the CIIE moving forward has become a global public good. And in the future, we will position CIIE as a more attractive public good, global public good, and it will serve as an international platform to address global trade deceleration and achieve sustainable global trade development. The theme of our sub-forum today is sustainable trade amid global climate change. It is well recognized that global trade and climate change in the Spanish rain, over 200 people went dead in this large rainfall in Spain, and we could feel the impacts of the climate change personally over the years. The rise of trade protectionism, heightened geopolitical risks, and also the result of the US election is about to come out, and we are going to meet the new challenges as well as opportunities. And also, we can see the regionalization and fragmentation of global supply chains. So they've slowed down our global trade growth. Meanwhile, climate change has become an urgent threat to humanity. And we've already reached a global consensus to address climate change, and it has become the largest consensus in the world in addressing climate change. Consequently, green transformation and sustainable development of global trade are essential. In recent years, the scale of green trade has continued to expand, with China leading this growth. In 2021, China's green trade volume reached $1.16 trillion, surpassing the EU as the world's largest green trade nation, representing 14.6% of the global total. What's more, China aims to peak carbon emissions by 2030, and actually before the year of 2030, as President Xi pointed out at International Forum, and also achieve carbon neutrality not only by 2060, but also before 2060. So carbon peak by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060. So we need to work on achieving this goal sooner. Currently, China is the world's largest producer of clean energy, with half of its energy production sourced from renewable resources, and it is a remarkable achievement, well recognized in the world. However, China also faces criticism for overcapacity in clean energy in the world. Yet, globally, demand for clean energy technologies and products has not reached the alleged overcapacity. According to estimates by the IEA, achieving carbon neutrality would require global demand for new energy vehicles to reach 45 million units by 2030, and there's still a large gap forward, while global solar PV capacity would need to increase by 820 gigawatts. Currently, we've only reached 1/4, roughly 4 times the level in 2022. What's more, we believe the development of global sustainable trade requires cooperation among countries, joint efforts to establish sustainable trade rules, and the promotion of green development through smooth trade flows to address climate change. And we are the only NGO that receives the consultative status from the UN. So we take a great role in promoting green development. And again, welcome everyone to be here. I wish it a great success. Thank you all. Thank you, Chairman Wang, for your wonderful speech. And next, let us welcome Mr. Pascal Lamy, former Director General of the WTO, to give a keynote speech for us.
Lamy, who is the former DG of WTO.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me, of course, thank the organizers, the China International Import-Export Bureau, and my friends at the China Center for Globalization for organizing this session, and having invited me to share with you a few remarks on this trade environment nexus. Whereas trade opening has been on the international agenda for roughly 2 centuries, we've had trade negotiations for 200 years now internationally. The environment issue popped up, surged, only 30 years ago. And they now both sit at a very important place of our international agenda. Of course, they are very different in magnitude, in dynamics. Trade opening is about improving the efficiencies of our economies. We can do that more, less, rapidly, slowly. Environment protection is about keeping our planet alive. So the first one is an issue of more or less. The second one is a question of life and death. Hence, one of the reasons why their coexistence is complex to organize And if that was not enough, there are many other reasons why articulating properly our international attitudes towards opening trade and protecting the environment is difficult. I'll make 3 short points. The first one is that in theory, market systems should provide for the proper relationship and articulation between the two. The second point is that, unfortunately, as we all know, it does not work this way. And third, I'll try to outline a few suggestions on how to better articulate what today is not properly articulated. Now, in theory, markets should do the trick for basically 2 reasons. The first one is that international division of labor, which trade opening fosters, leads to efficiencies, to specialization, to a better allocation of resources, including natural resources. Thus, opening trade is a contribution to a better allocation and a lesser use of natural resources. If Saudi Arabia decides to stop growing wheat because they don't have a lot of water, it's great that they can source wheat on a deep, large international market. If Indonesia specializes in wind turbines, the move to renewable energies with wind energy will be facilitated. Second reason is that if negative externalities to the environment, such as, for instance, carbon emissions, are properly priced, then production and trade should adjust to the change in relative prices, as they do in changes in relative prices for other costs. If the Chinese minimum wage grows, this has an impact on the localization of production, hence on trade patterns, same for the price of oil. Should be the case for the price of carbon. The problem being, and that's my second point, that it doesn't work that way in practice. For instance, we do not have a worldwide price of carbon. We have a worldwide price for oil, which is, by the way, emitting a lot of carbon, but we don't have a world price for carbon dioxide. And this stems mainly from the fact that we have big differences in the way internationally trade or the environment are governed, are regulated. In the trade field, we have a process towards more trade opening, and this process is based on multilaterally determined contributions. In the WTO, the members discuss among themselves, how much will you do, how much will I do? They find a balance, but this balance is a multilaterally determined balance. All the participants in the WTO agree on what they should do together. Now, it sometimes takes a bit of time, it sometimes is complex, but that's the principle. In the environment, it's very different. We all agree that we should go to zero carbon emissions, but we do it on the basis of nationally determined contributions. In the trade field, this is organized, coordinated. We don't have a target. We never said in the WTO, we have to go to zero tariff everywhere. But we have a process that is properly coordinated. Again, Slow, difficult, but it works. In the environment side, we have a sort of uncoordinated series of country per country trajectories to decarbonation with different timings, with different trajectories, with different instruments. Some will do carbon pricing, others will say, no, this has to come from taxation. No, this has to come from regulation. I want my steel to be administered at the border in such a case that the carbon footprint of the imported steel is the same as the one my domestic producers have to bear. These differences in the way trade openness and environment protection are governed inevitably leads to frictions insofar as environment protection measures impact the cost of production, thus the level playing field. Now, part of that has been, for a long time, administered properly by the WTO agreements, who recognize that trade opening has to contribute to environment protection. That's roughly what the WTO agreement in 1994 says. And we have in the WTO codes like the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, like the technical barrier to trade agreement, that help WTO administer the cases in which there are obstacles to trade in the name of protecting the environment. Sometimes they were recognized as okay, and sometimes they were not recognized as okay, roughly because of a proportion between the risk for the environment and the size of the obstacle to trade. Other measures of this kind, which inevitably are rising and will likely proliferate, like the EU Carbon Adjustment Mechanism, for instance, or the EU Deforestation Directive, which is also climate-related, are still to be considered by the WTO system. So, we have an issue which is inevitably difficult to articulate, and this leads to divides. If I look at the position of countries on this trade environment network, my country, the European Union, believes that we have to decarbonize, we have to impose on our producers standards, methods, prices that will lead them to adjust their production systems in order to match this decarbonation agreement. This will lead to border adjustments of a kind or another, and this will lead a lot of countries to believe that this is an unfair imposition on them of unilaterally determined EU measures, not multilaterally determined EU measures, but the EU says, I have my national determined contribution to do, and hence these accusations of green imperialism. And this is where we are for the moment. Let's be frank, for the moment, this divide is growing. Now, let me, in the spirit of pragmatism, finish these thought remarks with a few suggestions. I probably have 35 in mind. I'll leave you with 5 of them. The first one, which I think is good sense, but not really done, is that trade wonks should talk to environment wonks. In most of the cases, and believe me, I've been in the machine room for quite a bit of time, trade people and negotiators do not understand environmental people and negotiators and the other way around. This is a big problem because if you start from misunderstandings of this kind, then any friction will be more difficult to administer because they don't understand what's in the mind of the other side. Second, environment should be more prominent in WTO discussions, and trade should be more prominent in climate discussions. I have attended, as you can imagine, a large number of WTO ministerials. I have attended a large number of COPs ministerial after the Paris Agreement. There is a problem in the fact that in the WTO, a number of members resist discussions on the environment because this is the first step to whatever sort of green protectionism. And in COPs, they resist talking about trade because trade is something which is not looking nice. Not least because, of course, if you increase international trade, you produce more transport and so on. So we have to seriously consider that these conversations should happen on both sides, but the problem is that the international system is such that there's nobody to say, please do that in WTO, and please do that in climate COPs. Third suggestion, which I have floated quite a moment ago with the Jacques Delors Institute in Brussels that deals with green issues, the WTO should set up what we call a comparability forum, where environment-related measures taken by members if they impact trade should be notified, discussed, examined. In theory, there is a committee in WTO, which is the Committee on Trade and Environment, which is there to do that. But the reality is that it does not do that, or it does that very little. Such a discussion, which would be a stage one, should or could, after some time, lead to a stage two discussions, which would move from comparability to compatibility. After all, we may have good reasons to decarbonize our economies differently, but we have to understand why you do it this way, why I do it this way, and if possible, lead to some sort of agreement that we do it in an equivalent way. So research for this equivalence should take place in the WTO. Fourth, and before last suggestion, the WTO regime about green subsidies should be revisited. Some of you may remember that in the original WTO agreement in 1994, green subsidies were allowed for some time. But there was a time duration that lapsed, and this waiver, in a way, that was giving a larger scope for green subsidies, disappeared in 1999. And in my view, given where we are now, in the necessity to incentivize our economies and our production system to decarbonize, this should be reviewed. Of course, I understand that it may lead to a complex negotiation, but after all, we've had subsidies in agriculture, some of which are deemed more trade distortive, others less. After all, we could do that for the environment. And finally, I think the international system, not just the WTO, not just the COPs, but also the international financial system, should consider this trade-environment connection together with a third element, which is development. We will not find a solution, notably a North-South solution, to this better articulation, which I think we need, without factoring in the development dimension, Some countries are in a capacity to green their economies quickly because they have the necessary resources, the necessary technologies. Others not. Inevitably, this will lead to different timings and trajectory. This should be organized a bit like what we did 20 years ago with Aid for Trade, where a coordination of trade opening and trade capacity building was organized with development and technical assistance. My own view is that we now should do that. So we had Aid for Trade, we should have investment for climate in the future. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pascalami, for your really insightful and philosophical speech. And next, I would like to give the floor to Yi Xiaozhen, former Vice Minister of Commerce and Deputy Director General of the WTO, China's ambassador to the WTO. Now the floor is yours, Mr. Yi. Dear old friends, Mr. Pascalami, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all. I'm so glad to be here with all of you at this very session featuring sustainable trade amid climate change. As you all know, temperature around the world is like riding a roller coaster. We have a record high and record low temperature and such weathers, and that really rings the alarm of climate change to mankind. Comprehensively promoting carbon emission reduction and achieving carbon peaking and neutrality have become the consensus of the international community and represent a global challenge. On the other hand, by multilateral collaboration mechanism, we'll be able to be on the right track to resolve it. As we all know, many developed countries at the very end of last century, they've already achieved carbon peaking. And when it comes to promoting the carbon peaking policies, making and implementation process, there's a lot of cases and experiences we can possibly learn from. As the largest developing country in the world, China proposed that we'll really have to achieve carbon neutrality in the shortest amount of time possible, and that's a due contribution we make to the world. And for this year, it is the 30th anniversary of the creation of WTO. When it comes to tackling the challenge of climate change, WTO will have to be there. And I think this has already been re-emphasized by Mr. Pascalami. Even if WTO does not have specific rules to climate change, it provides, I would say, or serves as a very important platform for addressing the relationship between climate change and trade. For example, several years ago, WTO promoted Environmental Goods Agreement, EGA, that has become a very important issue for negotiation. The goal of that is to eliminate tariffs on a number of important environmental products, that is zero tariff in this way. And in this context, environmental goods refer to those products that contribute to the realization of environmental protection and the control of climate change, including clean and renewable energy, improved energy and resource efficiency, and the control of air pollution. If this negotiation can lead to a successful signing of agreement, it can really help significantly reduce the transaction cost of these environmental goods on a global scale. However, regrettably, various stakeholders and parties simply suspended the negotiations when they were only like half a step away from reaching agreement because of some minor differences. Given the importance of trade liberalization in combating climate change, I sincerely hope that all those stakeholders will restart the negotiation as quickly as possible and reach an early agreement in order to protect the common home of mankind. What's worrying is that recently a few developed countries have unilaterally raised tariffs or adopted discriminatory subsidy measures on the pretext of addressing climate change. It violates the very WTO's multilateral agreement, and it can also inevitably lead to the trade revenges of all those trading partners around the world, and that is actually hindering the collaboration in sustainable development of international trade. We see frequent geopolitical conflicts, global pandemic, and also the trade protectionism which is on the rise. The multilateral trading system has become very fragile, and these unilateral trade protection measures introduced by a few major trading countries may become the last thing that really break WTO's structure or institution. I feel like that in order to better tackle climate change and have this green transformation for economic development, we could not really violate multilateral trade rules and not to really do things at the expense of weakening the multilateral trading system. Any unilateral trade measures taken in disregard of WTO rules are unfair. The practice of various countries has proved that, as the green transition is very costly in the first place, it cannot be realized by market forces alone without government support and subsidies in the early stages. We noticed that. But whether it is industrial policy, trade policy, or financial subsidies, they should all be complied with the established rules of the WTO. Protectionism in the name of combating climate change will not help the green transformation of our economy, and more importantly, it will simply drag down the global efforts to combat climate change. I totally agree with what has been said by the Director General of the WTO. Fragmented and uncoordinated trade policies make carbon reduction efforts more difficult, not only adding uncertainty on the production side and impeding the cross-border flow of green technologies and inputs, but also reducing investment in clean technologies. A few weeks ago, the Paris-based ICC also issued a stark warning about the systematic risks posed by a series of unilateral trade measures recently introduced by major economies in key industrial sectors, including electric vehicles. It called for all the countries that should abide by the very words and spirit of existing WTO rules. And via WTO, we're going to resolve all those economic frictions. I would like to call upon all those major economies around the world when they are trying to tackle climate change around the world. We do need to strengthen the coordination of relevant trade policies under the WTO framework and ensure that trade measures taken to address climate change are in line with multilateral trade rules. That's it from me. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yi Xiaojun, for your very insightful keynote speech. And now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Eric Solheim, co-chair of the Europe-Asia Center, former Under-Secretary General of the UN and Executive Director of the UN Environment Program.
So, good afternoon, Shanghai. Ni hao to everyone. China is now the indispensable nation for the green transformation of the world. There's no way the world can go green without China. A couple of months back, I went to Xinjiang, and just outside Urumqi, my daughter and myself visited what is the largest solar plant in the world. It's 4 gigawatt, soon to be 8 gigawatt. How much is 4 gigawatt? It's as much as the entire grid in Nigeria. And Nigeria is, as you know, the largest nation in Africa. Last month, I went to Hongqiao, Zhejiang province. In Hongqiao, they have the largest battery in the world. I think most Chinese are not even aware. This battery, which is a pumped storage hydropower battery, is 2 gigawatt. That battery alone is larger than the entire energy system of most developing nations in the world. I could go on and go on. We have a representative here of Zhao Solar. Zhao Solar is one of the biggest solar companies in the world. That one company has delivered solar panels to the world for 200 gigawatt. That is as much as the renewable production of India, and India is the 3rd largest in renewable power in the world. So only rest of China and the United States are larger producer of renewable energy than just the company of Zhao Solar. I can go on and go on. Last year, China produced 2/3 of all renewable energy in the world, all the new renewable energy in the world, while the rest of the world, America, Europe, Africa, India, everyone else, is 1/3. Last year, China invested $900 billion US. That's more than 5 trillion RMB in renewables. How much is that? Well, just one comparison. This amount is 20 times the GDP, the entire economy of Nepal. And Nepal is a middle-sized Asian nation. So just investments in solar and wind and hydropower in China is 20 times everything produced in Nepal. There are so many comparisons which could be made. The main point to hammer in, there is no way we can go green without China. Well, of course, say the United States of America can go green without China. Just it will be so much more expensive and thus so much slower, because price and scale is, of course, absolutely critical to the green transformation. Look, it's now absolutely clear that the next president of the United States of America is Donald Trump. He's far ahead in the counting, so we can take that for completely granted. With the election of Trump, we must expect more trade issues to come to the front of the global agenda. Then what is called for is more intimate cooperation between China and Europe, and of course other players, to defend what the 2 earlier speakers spoke about, to defend the multilateral trade system, because that's the system which has made all of us richer, or at least nearly all of humans richer over the last decades. The average human being is much better educated, in much better health, much taller than we were in the past, and one reason for that is that we are trading with each other and the economies are more efficient. So Europe and China need to jointly defend this system and stand up for it and discuss it, of course, with President Trump and the American administration, but be firm in our commitment. So I will make a couple of suggestions as to what Europe should do and what China should do. What Europe should do is to start understanding that green competition is good. Green competition is a race to the top. Protectionism is a race to the floor, to the bottom. Over the last few months or maybe year, a new word has come into the global vocabulary. That's the word overcapacity. Look, this is a completely strange and curious word. What does it mean? China has overcapacity in electric cars, in solar panels, in windmills and electric batteries. Well, it means that China is making an enormous amount of beautiful green products to the world. The world should say, thank you, China, this is exactly what we need. We need more green products. We need green products which can replace the brown products. That's the call of the hour. And Europe needs to get up a little bit earlier in the morning be a little bit more innovative and regulate the markets better so that we can compete. And just to understand how curious this idea of overcapacity is. What is that? This is my phone. This is an Apple phone. Well, I'm a European, I'm not an American. Why am I buying an Apple phone? Because Apple has overcapacity in phones. They produce a lot more phones than they can consume in the American market, and that's why people all over the planet are buying Apple phones, and it's what makes Apple the most valuable company anywhere in the world. If Apple did not have overcapacity and just produced for the American market, well, it will still be a substantial company, but the cost will be much, much, much smaller. So when America has overcapacity in phones and other digital products, China has overcapacity in electric cars and solar panels, or my nation, Norway, has overcapacity in salmon, well, that's the foundation for trade, and we need to defend it, and Europe should stand up for these global principles. Then what can China do better? There are complaints from a number of European companies that they struggle to penetrate the Chinese market. That may be because they're not competitive, but it also may be because Chinese consumers or political leaders prefer domestic companies. So my advice to China is to do its utmost to help European and other international companies to succeed in the Chinese market, because then these companies will be the advocates for China, for helping China to succeed in their markets. I mean, as an example, Volkswagen has been very successful until recently in the Chinese market, and Volkswagen has also been standing up for the principles of trade because it's in the interest of the company. So help French, German, Scandinavian, American companies to be successful in the Chinese market, to understand the market better and do better here, then they will help you in the global markets. And secondly, also understand that jobs are local. If you are the president of France, Mr. Macron, Pascal knows him very well, you are interested in jobs in France. You are not so concerned with jobs in Fujian. If you are Chancellor Scholz of Germany, your main concern is jobs in Germany, not in Guangdong or Guangxi. So if jobs are at the core of this, if Chinese companies are investing more abroad, they will share technology and they will help creating jobs in other markets. Of course, this is a demand to Europe also. Europe should roll out its red carpets for the Chinese companies, invite them to come and help, for instance, in partnership with European companies, driving the electric car revolution. By the way, this is exactly what China did when China invited Tesla to come here to Shanghai to create what the Chinese said, a catfish in the Chinese electric car market, which will make the market more competitive and thus running faster. But Europe needs to stand up for its own principles, stop the tendency towards trade wars and protectionism, and China can be helpful by investing more in Europe and helping European companies to do well in China. Of course, a lot of this is happening already. Say BYD is now investing in Uzbekistan, in Turkey, in Brazil, in Thailand, and in many other markets, but we need to do more of this to be successful together. So on this day, when Donald Trump is elected President of the United States, let's agree that China and Europe, and for sure with many American and other partners, let's stand up to defend the multilateral trade system that has made us all richer, and it will also make us all greener. Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you, Soham, for your unique perspective and profound observation on global green development and China's innovation practices. Thank you for your sharing. And next, let's give the floor to Mr. Xu Xiaofeng, President of the China Meteorological Service Association and former Deputy Director of the China Meteorological Administration, to give a keynote speech. Let's welcome. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be invited to participate in the Forum on Sustainable Trade amid Climate Change. This is indeed a very important topic that requires in-depth discussion in the face of the severe and complex challenges we currently meet with climate change. According to the World Meteorological Organization, the global average temperature in 2023 was 1.45 degrees Celsius higher than pre-industrial levels, marking the hottest year on record. The situation this year, in 2024, remains severe and challenging, with a global average temperature roughly the same as or even higher than that in 2023. It represents a marked increase compared to multi-year averages for 2022, 2023, and 2024. Well, in the first half of 2024, the average temperature was higher than that last year, and for the second half of this year, it has been lowered. So on average, for the whole year, it's similar. In June 1992, at the UN Conference on Environment and Development held in Rio de Janeiro, heads of state signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. They reached a consensus on coordinated and collective action to address climate change. Then, in November 2015, over 150 heads of state and government attended the climate conference in Paris, where they signed the Paris Agreement together. They set the goal of keeping the global average temperature increase below 2 degrees Celsius relative to pre-industrial levels. What's more, they strive to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Also, they set up a target of achieving net zero emissions in the second half of this century. While there is an international consensus on actively addressing climate change, many countries around the world have made efforts towards this end. The current situation is not optimistic, though. So far, greenhouse gases causing temperature increases have not been effectively controlled in the atmosphere. In 1992, we signed the UNFCCC. Following it, 30 years have passed. So we could see the whole carbon dioxide emissions have not been effectively controlled in the atmosphere. And according to what we see, what we observe for the trajectory, so even there's really limited mitigation trends as well. So last year, according to the World Meteorological Organization, there were 2 ppm increase. So for a dozen of years, there's a steady increase, showing no decrease trend. And according to the World Meteorological Organization's annual report, global average surface carbon dioxide concentration reached 420 ppm in 2023, representing 151% of pre-industrial levels. And there was an annual increase higher than in 2022. And reflecting on these results, the Secretary General, Hattori Talas, said that this year has set yet another record, which should serve as a wake-up call for decision makers. We are clearly off the path to achieving our Paris Agreement's goals. So currently we are not on the right track. We are unable to maintain this 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius goal by the mid of this century. And it's hard for us to reach the net zero carbon emission goal for us. In the face of the abnormal climate changes worldwide over the past 2 years, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has repeatedly issued warnings. On September the 6th last year, he stated, "Our planet has just experienced a boiling season." He used this term, boiling, the hottest summer on record. climate collapse has begun. So climate breakdown has begun. And he called on world leaders to intensify efforts to find climate solutions. We still have a chance to avoid the worst climate chaos, and every moment counts for us. On July the 25th, 2024, about 3 months ago, Guthrie spoke again. He emphasized that July 21st, was the hottest day on record. And then on July 22nd and 23rd, it climbed even higher for 3 consecutive days. In other words, talking about the increase in global temperature, he said that it is estimated that high temperatures kill nearly 500,000 people annually, about 30 times more than tropical cyclones, according to the World Health Organization's estimates. So there is evidence behind the data, according to the World Health Organization's estimates. So the deaths caused by the high temperature was close to 500,000 people, around 490,000. And today, we're talking about the impact of extreme high temperatures. As mentioned by our guest speakers, there are more and more extreme high temperature weathers in recent years. In addition, there is also the heat waves causing death as well, and there's more and more severe hurricanes, floods, droughts, wildfires, rising sea levels. For example, in March this year, on the 31st, in Nanchang, in Jiangxi province, so people were actually flown out of the window because of the heavy wind, which was really seen in history, which was unprecedented. And in Dalian, and also in Jiangsu, there was the big rainfall, unprecedented in history as well. So they all sounded an alarm call for all of us, and we could see the analysis of the global climate changes, and they are closely related to human activities. In the Global Risks Report 2024, published by the World Economic Forum in January 2024, 20 different types of disaster risks were ranked, with extreme weather at the top of these 20 types. This past summer, indeed, the Northern Hemisphere suffered from frequent extreme disasters, impacting Europe, Asia, and North America, as well as some unusual areas like the Middle East, which experienced very rare flooding. So it's really rare for the Middle East to experience flooding. And also the large flooding in Spain as well, because Spain is also pretty dry, causing 200 deaths out of this heavy flood. Also in South Asia, there was record-breaking high temperatures and severe landslides. In addition to the extreme natural disasters we can directly feel, does climate change significantly affect the sustainable trade, the topic of today's forum? As mentioned by our guest speakers, they mentioned this topic many times. We can see the answer is yes. To address the climate issues, reducing carbon emissions has become an inevitable choice for countries worldwide.
And we need to make policies accordingly. And during the trade, levying carbon tax has become an important method. In 1990, Finland pioneered the carbon tax in the world, and then some European countries followed, like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and so on. And the object of the carbon tax extended from enterprises to all taxpayers. And the trade policy change that will influence the whole world trade actually took place on March 15th, 2022. The European Union Economic and Financial Affairs passed the act that by 2026 they will levy the the carbon tariff on steel, cement, aluminum, fertilizer, and power production. And that will definitely affect the world trade immensely and cause chain effect. When faced with multiple challenges and influences of the climate change, Chinese government issued in 2022 the National Strategy to Adapt to Climate Change 2035. And it coined that the prevention of climate risk needs to pass from the natural ecosystem to the economic and social system, and also take the key areas that's influenced by the weather as the grappling point, and also increase the climate resilience. So today we're talking about a topic that's really fitting this strategy. With the exchanges and discussions of the representatives, it will definitely promote our understanding and knowledge on the sustainable trade issue and create very good environment for the policy and society for dealing with the climate change. I wish this conference a complete success. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Xu Xiaofeng, for the brilliant presentation. So he commented on the global actions and he analyzed the situation and he provided very clear background. Next, let's welcome the president of Bank of Communications and the deputy party secretary, Zhang Baojiang. Let's welcome. Distinguished guests, good afternoon. I'm very glad to participate in this forum. Around the topic of this forum and also with our experience, I would like to talk a bit about financing sector assisting the green trade industry. So green trade is the inevitable requirement for sustainable development. The 20th Third Plenary Session stated that we need to strengthen the synergy of trade policy and finance and taxation, finance and industrial policies to deal with the trend of digitalization and green development. Now, the green trade is booming. According to the WTO, now it accounts for 20% of the cargo trade of the world. So in terms of production, logistics and transportation, and trade and distribution, to provide green trade in those areas is our responsibility and also our opportunity. First, we need to serve green manufacturing and assist the greenification of product and production. So at the source, we need to expand the green and low carbon product supply and promote the green transition of the production process. Bank of Communications took green as the base color of our business in the whole group, and we used the credit and loan and bond and leasing to provide more supply of green finance. Up till the end of June, our balance of green loan was over 870 billion, half of them going into clean energy, energy saving, environment protection, and clean production. And for green bond investment, our balance was over 20 billion yuan. And our subsidiary, the financial leasing company, had the balance of green leasing over 45 billion. Second, we need to reduce the carbon footprint of product transportation. Currently, 90% of the global trade is carried out by maritime transfer. According to the International Shipping Association, in order to realize the emission reduction organized by the International Maritime Association, the gap funding is expected to be over $1 trillion. So Bank of Communications continued to use our advantage in financial service and try to provide assistance to the green and low carbon transition. And up till the end of June, we have established the Green Ship Guarantee Letter up to 23.7 billion yuan. And now we are also participating in the drafting of the national catalog of the transportation transition. And we also implemented the first maritime transfer transitional financial loan, and we also demonstrated very good social effect. And the third is to serve the green trade financing to adapt to the green development need of the customers. And also it is a great response to the carbon taxation and establish the green supply chain. In the credit certificate and prepayment financing, in those traditional sectors, we promoted the product and service innovation and explored the carbon hooked trade financial product and green supply chain finance business. And we actively cooperate with the customers in terms of the carbon estimation and evaluation. And we have the case-by-case plan to provide customized green financing service. So in China, there's a saying, if something is far away, if you go, it gets closer. If something is hard, if you do it, it gets easier. So we need continuous effort in this endeavor. Bank of Communications is willing to cooperate with all aspects to serve the green trade and green development and strengthen our exchange in this. I would like to take the opportunity to thank all walks of life for giving us care and support. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Zhang Baojiang from Bank of Communications. And I want to thank you for listening. So just now, the speakers gave us very good insights and sharing. So that is the end for this part of the session. Thank you. Okay. Dear guests, I think you are seated. And after the opening ceremony and the keynote speech session, now let's come into the very lively session of panel. So we have some heavyweight guests as our panelists. So we will be able to expect some outstanding content. So please allow me to introduce to you the senior guests today. We're honored to have invited the heavyweight guests in this forum. So let me introduce. First, former DG of the WTO and coordinator of the Jacques Delors Institute and vice chairman of the Paris Peace Forum, Pascal Lamy, on my left. Please welcome. And we have member of the Standing Committee of the 12th CPPCC and former chairman and secretary of the party group of Sinopec, also a distinguished professor, Fu Chengyu. And president of China Meteorological Service Association, former deputy director of China Meteorological Administration, Xu Xiaofeng. And we also have some representatives from the business, chief commercial officer of PHP, Ragnar Ud. And we have the Chief Executive Officer of PepsiCo Greater China and Chief Consumer Officer of PepsiCo Asia Pacific, and Xie. And our old friend, Chief Executive of the European Policy Center, member of the Executive Board of Transparency International EU, Honorary Fellow at the Europa Institute of University of Edinburgh, Fabian Zulik. And with us, we have senior expert, the chief economist of Alliance of Global Talent Organization, David Blair. So for this discussion, it is an hour long. So I think we can have a round of stating your basic views, and then we may have another round of topic discussion. And today, the topic is threefold. The China, Europe, and USA and their perspectives, and the synergy and the vision of synergy of their rules and regulations. And the other thing is for China, Europe, and USA, the opportunities of green cooperation. And the last is that since we do have a lot of business representatives, so for sustainable trade and green finance, what is the role of the enterprise? So I hope that through this discussion, we can further promote the cooperation in terms of green, sustainable trade between China and the counterpart, aside from the political differences.
Subject that we are having today. So to facilitate our international guests, I conduct this in English now. So I will have a first round, maybe each of you, I think, let's say 5 minutes, probably give you some personal statement and assessment regarding the several questions I just raised. But of course, we also can combine your own thinking and your own perspective. I know Pascal just made a keynote. Maybe I start with you, Pascal. You are 2 terms of Director General of WTO in Geneva, which is an organization that greatly drives the globalization and trade. And now the whole world is in the transition. And so how do you think that China, EU, US, and global South countries, can we work together for this green transition? And what can we do on the global trade and upgrading and regulations? Now we are having President Trump likely to win the US election now. And so what is coming next? How we can really work together? I mean, we had an excellent discussion at CCG yesterday, but would like to hear more from you today with this big platform at the Shanghai Import Expo, the largest import expo in the world, and you are the largest trade organization chair for many years. Pascal, please.
Well, let me use a few others of my hats, like my hat as the chair of the Climate Overshoot Commission, my hat as a coordinator of the Institut Jacques Delors. Of course, I won't forget trade. And I'm trying to answer your question in what can China, EU, US do together. I think the main thing they have to do together is do more. The reality, the dark reality, is that we are not doing enough. Not that we are doing nothing. I mean, you have in China a solid greening policy. We have a solid greening policy in the EU. The US have a solid greening policy, even if it is not directed by the president. But we don't do enough. So the starting point is we have to do more. We have to accelerate our green transition. For the moment, where we are on climate change, for instance, is on our way to a 2.5 degree increase instead of the 1.5 limit which was agreed in Paris, and a 2.5 increase of the world temperature is a catastrophe. And this is an average. It's much more for some, a bit less for others, so that's the starting point. 2 areas which I would recommend for joint action. The first one is a better coordination between US, EU, and China on the 4 tracks on which we need to work to reduce global warming, cutting emissions, adaptation to climate change, carbon removal, and even geoengineering. And I'm including geoengineering in my equation because this is one of the boxes which we have opened at the Climate Commission, which gave its report last year during the UNGA meeting. We, in my view, have to do the C, the A, the R, and the E. We have to cut emission. We have to foster adaptation. we have to start considering carbon removing, because assuming we stop emissions, this stops the increase in the temperature, but then you have to go to net zero positive. And we probably also have to look at geoengineering options, such as, for instance, solar radiation modifications, which are dangerous, but which may, in last resort, be necessary, and we have suggested a moratorium. So, what EU, US, and China should do together is these 4 things, but in a coordinated way. Today, we are working on cutting emissions, we are working on adaptation, some are working on carbon removal, some are working on geoengineering, but there is no discussion in the trade-offs between these options. And this is a problem, because at the end of the day, we need to do everything, but with an order of priority, which I think personally remains with cutting emissions. And for instance, in this case, we, China, US, EU, exit fossil fuels quicker than the rest of the world. These are the 3 main industrialized economies on this planet, not the only ones, but the biggest one. We should exit fossil fuels at a time horizon which is shorter than others, in order to leave them for more time to adjust, because they are not as industrialized as we are, and they have less resource, less capital, less technology. So this is one example where I think we should better coordinate our efforts. The second one, in order to remain short, is that we together should better resource poorer countries that also have to decarbonize, although their levels of emission are nothing like ours. If we look at emissions per head, EU is roughly at 7 per head. China is probably now at 11 or 12, and US is probably at 15 or 16, although the numbers may be disputed, but this is the order of magnitude. None of the other developing countries' economy is as high. So this is the numbers map which we have in mind. We should together provide poorer developing countries that still have to industrialize with the necessary resources and capacity. This has to do first and foremost with adaptation. We all know that the main victims of global warming will be in specific climate zones on the planet, which are not the ones, by the way, who are responsible for most of them, for emitting the carbon dioxide that is up there. So this is something which we should do together as industrialized country. Now, I know there are debates whether China is or not a developing country, and I leave that aside. What's for sure is that China is an industrialized country. That's the reality. Hence, the possibility for the 3 of us, and in my view, the necessity, starting with the financing of adaptation, which is what many poorer countries now have to do. And then, and that's my final answer to your question, we together should organize carbon market and the pricing of nature services. I'm convinced that whatever we do with our public money or with international financial institutions, it's private money that will solve the problem. Private money has to come. It will not come if I cannot sell a nature service on a market that gives me an incentive to do that. So incentivizing through market mechanism private money is, and that's the first station to this way is carbon markets with the necessary depth, size, and level of trust. Those are my short and quick recommendations. Maybe the US will be less forthcoming with Mr. Trump than Madame Harris. That's likely, although my experience is that the US economy and US economic operators now have started going the green way. It might not accelerate. And after all, if they slow, we, US and China, and this is what I heard earlier in our discussions, we, Europeans and Chinese, should take the baton.
Thank you, Pascal. Excellent. You made 3 excellent points. Actually, first, I mean, of course, all China, US, EU should, exit the fossil energy as quickly as possible. China already half of the energy now is renewable, so China is meeting that challenge, which is great. I think all the other EU, US can do. And of course, second, let's help the global South together. And thirdly, let's set up a global standards and rule and also new format to meet that challenge. So those are really great points. Thank you, Pascal. 那么下面呢，我想请这个
And now, I would like to give the floor to a very prestigious expert in energy sector, Professor Fu Chengyu. And he used to become the chairman of Sinopec, and for many years in Chinese energy sector, he enjoys a very good reputation, while at the same time, he serves as the very professor at business school. For example, the CKGSB. And now, I would like to give the floor to you, Professor Fu. Can I just share my view in Chinese?
Okay.
Just now, I heard several keynote speeches, and Pascal again shared a lot of his insights with us. And based on the theme of today's event, it matters a lot. For important things in China, it can be really difficult for us to accomplish, and there is a huge gap to fill in. In terms of climate change, what we lack is international collaboration. And the main reason for that is not about the willingness of enterprises. Instead, it's all about politicians from different countries. They might have different ideas. They simply use their own policies in their own country to maybe prioritize a little more to the votes they might gain for their party or the party they serve for, and therefore it's really hard for us to collaborate. I know we have best wishes for such collaboration, but in reality it's really hard for us to start such collaboration around the world. And for my new function, I'm the member of the International Advisor Committee for COP28, as well as relevant carbon neutrality committee in China and a voluntary carbon integrity committee's member. And that is to say, we have a lot of chances, really, to discuss these matters on international stage, to really dive into our collaboration with the rest of the countries in tackling climate change. We found that we always had very good dialogue. However, when it came to our reality, it was so hard. When we were preparing for COP28 for 1 year, we feel like the negotiation was particularly challenging at that time. With the government's hard efforts in UAE, for example, and also for our negotiation with major economies around the world, we have made a lot of progress. And then we still are having our expectation for realizing the Paris Agreement goals. And right after 1 year after COP28, we haven't really seen such changes taking place on the ground. For those comments made by politicians, they tend to just be lip services without taking tangible actions on the ground. And consequently, right now around the world, the drive for us might not be economic development or climate change. It's about the so-called political correctness or national security. And those two buzzwords have become the main ideas of the politicians in different countries. For all those politicians opposing such international collaboration by citing political correctness as well as national security, and against this backdrop, what should we really do here? We shouldn't really change our major direction to develop ourselves.
For Chinese entrepreneurs and also for the foreign businessmen, we need to work together to understand the future of the world. The future of the world is also the world of the enterprises, not the world of politicians. So in response to climate change, the Chinese government is working really hard, is truly working on the implementation. So what do I mean? Well, the Chinese government has launched its comprehensive plan, its strategic plan, with long-term goals and with the midterm goals by 2060. By 2060, we would reach carbon neutrality, and we have 3 specific targets as well: the 2025 goal and 2030 goal, as well as 2060 goal. So we have these milestones for the years to come. So under these milestones, there are national development plans. So for all the industries or the sectors, we have detailed plans for its transition, for their transition. So the national government in July launched one new document to promote the economic social transformation. So they've made our goals even more concrete and detailed. What's more, they've launched 7 laws and regulations which are to be in place very soon to respond to climate change, carbon reduction, as well as electrification transition, as well as water facilities. So all these laws are related to carbon reduction. What's more, there is the green finance system, which is in line with our carbon reduction milestones and also carbon trade. So altogether form a system forward. It's not just like empty words by other governments in the world. So the Chinese government is making true efforts, and Chinese enterprises should not imitate the practices of some Western companies, just like President Xi once proposed. Carbon neutrality and carbon peak goals are self-developed by us. They are beneficial to us, in essence. So they are related to the sustainable development of the Chinese nation and important to build the community with a shared future for mankind. So in the end, that is beneficial to the Chinese nation as well as to the whole world. But when we can see that some countries are not cooperating with China in this regard, and we are not afraid of that. We are promoting our self-independence in terms of wind energy, solar energy, batteries, energy storage, and EV cars, and so on and so forth. We are leading all these sectors and industries. They represent the advanced productive forces. If other countries do not promote these important sectors, it's very likely for them to lag behind. So after Trump takes its precedence, he is likely to quit the Paris Agreement again. He would also go against the new energy development of China, but that is not in favor of the US, actually, in essence. So we have to stay on our right track, stay on our path forward. And today, China is under fast development based on our strategies and plans set by the central government. In the US, many people, politicians, are against ESG. But for China, I believe that we should not do so. ESG is important for China, for the Chinese enterprises. It's the inherent driving force for the Chinese nation as well as for our enterprises. It's an inherent power and momentum for us. So companies around the world have to insist on green development, and they represent the high technologies in the future. So they are not the common technologies we see today. President Xi has proposed to develop the new quality productive forces. They are not the conventional technologies. They have to be more innovative and original. They are disruptive technologies representing the future in the world. So these technologies are able to bring new ecology, new business models, and new sectors. And with these new technologies, we are able to transform our traditional industries and sectors. What's more, with these new technologies, there are going to be new industries in place in the future. Currently in China, we have the low altitude economy. In the future, there's going to be more and more low altitude economy. So all these disruptive technologies are beneficial to China's development in its long term, and we have to leverage these new technologies for the low carbon transition for China's development. And also, we have to cooperate with other countries. So if other countries are unwilling to cooperate with us, then we just seek the partners who are willing to do so. So many people are saying the overcapacity in solar power, in EV cars, in batteries. Actually, that's not the case. It's just a temporary. It's phase by phase. By 2022, our electricity consumption was 8.6 trillion watt. And in 2023, that was 9.2 trillion. And by 2060, our electricity consumption would reach 22 to 24 trillion watt. So 2 times larger, a twofold increase. So electricity has to be green. It should not be generated using traditional fossil fuels. So with this goal, to this end, our road forward is quite challenging. We have to reduce carbon emissions. That's not enough. We have to turn carbon into resources, into valuable assets. So carbon should not just be a burden to our society, to our nation. So China is promoting the transfer of carbon into materials on a large scale, on a batch scale. So we believe that in terms of technology, we have to step up our investment. We have to continue our R&D, reduce carbon emissions, and that would be very beneficial to China's development and would help draw the development of developing countries together and collaborate with our developed nations and partners. So if there is a high tariff from some nations, then definitely it would hurt these countries. 40 years ago, when we were still weak, it's hard for us to protect our own market. The more open we are, the better we are able to develop. So some developed countries want to protect themselves today. Maybe they're entering this new stage. They feel it's harder for them to move forward. And China has to move forward faster as well. We'd like to work with countries around the world and companies around the world, regardless of the political limitations. Thank you. Thank you, Chen Yu, for your sharing. That's very insightful and inspiring. Indeed, the more open we are, the more developed we are. That's true, according to the historic law, according to the historic laws. So, carbon reduction is not just for the sake of the world, but also important to ourselves. That's a very good interpretation. Yes, we are open to cooperation, and we also have these own needs. So thank you again for Fu Chenyu. Thank you, Chairman, for your wonderful sharing. And next, we'd like to give the floor to Xu Xiaofeng, the president of CMSA, the China Meteorological Service Association. So you mentioned many points in this regard, and give you 5 more minutes to elaborate on your idea. So in terms of climate change, since you are a meteorology expert and specialist, so climate change, what does climate change mean? Is it going to bring a big change to our world, to our industry, to our lifestyles, to move towards a low carbon world. So since you're an expert in this regard, are you able to elaborate more in addition to your keynote speech? Thank you. So indeed, I'm very glad to attend this forum. So we are part of the China Meteorological Administration, and we held the service trade fair every year. So every year we will talk about the low carbon development as well as big health and the low altitude economy. So it's the first time we attend the CIIE. So I think it has been officially the first time that our association attends the CIIE. So it's very glad for us to share this topic with you at CIIE at this important forum. Just like I mentioned in my speech, it may sound a bit pessimistic, but as Lamy just said, when we work together, well, we are actually working together, but we are not working together enough and sufficiently. So some politicians do not honor their words. So they're not doing what they say. They're not practicing what they say. As we signed the UN CFFF in the year of 1992, that was of legal significance for the Kyoto Protocol and for the Paris Agreement. So they actually had this legal framework under the United Nations, like in the EU, in the US. So many people actually wanted to bring the government to court, saying that they are not honoring their words, but it's hard for them to win the lawsuit. I think that these international mechanisms should have the legal binding effects. We should not just see that the global warming is increasing, the extreme weathers are on the rise. We should not turn a blind eye to all of these phenomena. Just like interviewed in the fair in World Trading Services, you are promoting the low carbon economy, you are promoting the low altitude economy. So what's its relationship to climate change? Well, if it is not climate change, it's hard for us to develop low altitude economy. So right now, the trade has been on the rise, and we have to further curb carbon emissions. If the carbon emissions are still on the rise, if there's an increase 2 ppm this year and 2 ppm next year, then it would be very difficult for us to control. Like Nord Haas, the Nobel Prize winner in the economies, mentioned that there should be a balance in trade and economy as well as the ecology. If you reach this turning point, it's hard for you to turn it back. It's irreversible. The whole ecology would go on the wrong track. It's hard for you to reverse the trends. Last year, I communicated with a CCTV journalist. I shared this idea. So currently, we say there are more and more extreme weathers, more frequent extreme weathers. So if it is frequent, can we still call it an extreme weather? It becomes the new normal, right? It's not extreme weather anymore. It has become more and more common. We see many cases this year in the US, in Europe, in Middle East, in India, in all regions around the world. There are frequent extreme weathers, and so in the end, they are not extreme weathers anymore. They are more and more common. They become the new common for the world, new normal for the world. So that's my point. In addition, I'd like to say, to react to climate change, to address climate change, if we are unable to solve climate change, so what's the prospect forward? I may sound a bit pessimistic, but I'm in favor of Mr. Fu just said. So we should adhere to our own path. We should stay on the right track. We're able to do so. So now the world is a bit pessimistic on the climate issues. And we should not be pessimistic. We should not be too pessimistic. Our technologies are developing rapidly, including the new energy vehicles, the green electricity generation. China is leading the world in these sectors, and there are very promising prospects in the future. in 2022, our electricity generation was 8.6 trillion watt, and 2023 was 9.2 trillion. And next year, for example, it's likely to increase to 10 trillion. So that's about electricity generation. Green electricity only accounts for over 10%, around 15%, like wind energy and solar energy, totaled 15%. So if we go on this path, if we adhere to this right track to continue to develop our green technologies, so I may not be able to find an accurate figure. So about our storage of the wind power and solar power, currently we do not have the specific data at hand, but according to our analysis, according to our studies, we can have some rough data. So how to calculate these wind power and solar power remains unsolved, but we believe every year we have the storage of 100 trillion watt wind energy. But the wind energy is unable to be used, but we can store them at least.
And there's even more solar power, like 7 to 8 times that of wind power. Maybe it's not accurate, but that's the ballpark. If we can really get that energy utilized, then I think we can achieve green power and green energy driven. So in the future, our climate and our environment will get better. And the important thing is science and technology. In the past, we sometimes mix the science with others. We don't really emphasize on that, but actually that is the most important thing in our life. Through reducing the emission and reducing the energy consumption, we can get the technology better. And somebody say that there are more than enough cars, but I don't think it's already saturated. I think in the future, technology can bring new changes to our world. I don't know whether that answers your question. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Xu. Very well said. I think climate has become an important global phenomenon and also the direction of transition. So I think we need to strengthen the cooperation, like do our own business as well as increasing the global cooperation. Then I would like to invite Mr. Ragnar Ud.
Largest, actually probably the largest resource company in the world, and a leading resource company, and of course critical minerals and supply chain is a hot topic these days, and also globally. So as Chief Commercial Officer at this biggest leading resource company, RAG, what's your view on the suggestion for the sustainable trade for critical minerals, for example? I'd like to hear from you also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wang. And look, I do want to extend a warm gratitude to actually being invited to this forum, because this is actually a topic that resonates very, very deeply with BHP. And I know for a lot of people, they'll look at an organization like BHP and say, well, hold on, you're a resources company, a mining company. Are you really committed to decarbonization? And the fact of the matter is, yes, we are. In point of fact, as an organization, over the last 5 years, we've actually dropped our emissions by more than 30% relative to a 2020 baseline. So this is something that is fundamental to our organization, and we believe that the net zero transition will transform the global economy. And we've specifically gone about actually repositioning our portfolio over the last decade to ensure that we are actually not only ready to assist, but have positioned basically ourselves to globally be in a position to meet the world's needs in terms of the raw materials actually necessary to hit decarbonization. So what does that mean? For a company like BHP, we produce basically high quality copper. We're now the world's largest copper producer. We produce iron ore, high quality steel making coal, and all of those ingredients are going to be essential basically for global economic development. And we see that basically as vital ingredients basically for the electrification of our energy and our transport systems. But we know very well that it's not just the products that matter, it's actually how we produce those products that actually matter. And that's actually where I want to spend a bit of time actually focusing today, because a lot of the comments that I've heard from some of the earlier panelists resonate deeply with myself in terms of some of the practical barriers that are actually holding us back. and also some opportunities in terms of what liberates that for us in the future as well. So at BHP, we seek to sustainably and efficiently produce more of the essential resources the world's going to need basically in the decades to come. And we do that because we actually want to address climate change. We want to actually ensure that the population is basically growing and that there's actually a high quality and standard of living necessary for the population moving forward. And we recognize that there is also going to be increased urbanization, whether that's in China, India, or other parts of the globe as they modernize and develop as well. Most of our operations are based in South Australia or South America, and Australia as a whole. And it's across those regions that we are basically supplying globally, basically in large volumes of our materials, and well over 50% of the product that we actually produce is actually coming into Asia, and a great majority of that into China. Now, our approach to sustainable trade extends to working for our customers to ensure that we help them reduce carbon emissions as quickly as possible. We're collaborating to unlock new and more sustainable ways to produce, trade, these essential products that the world's going to need for the decades to come. Now, we know that the demand for resources is only going to grow. And that is a bit of a difficult concept for people at times because everybody likes the idea of more copper, but the idea that that might actually come from a copper mine, well, that's not something that necessarily resonates with people, but it's a practical reality in terms of what necessarily is going to happen. And so if you're going to have a copper mine, we aspire to be the world's best copper miner in terms of how we do that in terms of ESG standards and also in terms of sustainability. Now, I'll use copper as maybe a bit of a specific example. What we see in the world is that the need for copper is going to significantly increase. So we see electrification of energy and transport systems taking place. We see data centers basically exploding globally, and we think data centers, which require a significant amount of copper, will go from very low representation in terms of total copper demand at the moment of about 500,000 tons to potentially shaping up almost 6 to 7% of basically the world's copper demand over the next few decades. We are expecting that basically total copper global demand will increase from about 30 million tons today to 50 million tons by 2050. So in the next 25 years, we expect to see a 70% increase in the demand for copper. Now, in order to deliver that, what's going to be necessary is we estimate that the industry is going to need about $250 billion of capital between now and 2035. So in the next decade, $250 billion basically to actually bring forward the copper necessary for decarbonization. But if you take a look at what's actually happening globally, in the last decade, we've only seen $150 billion invested in copper mines, and it isn't getting any faster. So at BHP, we're stepping up to play our part through exploration, development, finding additional copper resources, and trying to find out how to actually bring it forward. And at this point, we actually have the world's largest copper global endowment, and we are looking for ways to actually bring that forward. In addition to that, we're looking for ways to actually, how do we make those existing mines sustainable? So if I take a look at one of our operations, Escondida, which is based in Chile, it is actually the world's largest copper mine. It basically runs 100% on renewable power. And we draw water for that mine basically from desalination plants that we built almost a decade ago to ensure that we actually were not drawing water from Andean aquifers. We know that the move to that renewable energy system has basically displaced more than 3 million tons of CO2 per year, which is the equivalent of 700,000 combustion engine cars on the road on an annual basis. Now, we're going to continue to invest like projects like these across our global operations because we know that it's not only the right thing to do, but we believe we have an obligation to the world to actually ensure that what we're producing is done in a responsible way. Now, how we and other in the sectors trade these products is important too. So, and I think there's a broad alignment that most of the world is actually looking at decarbonization and saying this is something we'd like to see. But to some of the earlier points, there are trends playing out in terms of domestic policy settings that are threatening to hold back that net zero transition. That includes a flight to resource nationalism, ongoing turbulence basically with the international trade mechanisms, and that's completely complicating the procurement of the necessary raw materials necessary for that energy transition. We see that actually starting to play out in terms of restricted trade and restricted trade in those supply chains, inefficient permitting in terms of bringing that forward, uncompetitive local productivity frameworks. Effectively, it is just becoming harder to actually meet what the world needs in terms of that climate change. Now, there's a lot of reasons in terms of what's driving that, whether it's conflict in the Middle East, Europe, governments wanting to actually position themselves as independent and secure. But if we actually don't start to pivot to a world where global collaboration is actually going to allow those clean energies to come on its scale, that is going to be a tragedy. And I talk about it from how we think about the raw commodities we're bringing forward, but I think there's some great examples of the products that China is actually producing at scale, that those trade is actually being restricted into other countries, which is actually preventing an area where China is actually leading to actually bring that back into move forward. So what do we think needs to happen? We basically, that the world needs to re-embrace the principles of global trade. We encourage governments to collaborate on modernizing the WTO, the rules and the systems basically to ensure that they remain appropriate and effective for today's world, and that we get the fundamentals right in terms of ensuring that markets are fair, open, and transparent. And we need to ensure that those standards and frameworks that sit out there allow people to exercise choice when it comes to sustainability. So markets need to be positioned in such a way that they can differentiate between a dirty product or a clean product to actually bring forward. Now, we know that no single sector can actually deliver that alone, but this is where global collaboration and working together across nations and forgetting about the politics that sit out there and focusing on fundamentally what we need to do as a globe and as individuals and corporations in that globe, we think is something that is very important and something that we aspire to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great, Ragnar. Excellent point. I think you have very comprehensively talked about BHP's overall strategy in coping with this sustainable development and green trade. So, company case in the point. So it add value to our discussion. Now, 我们下面还要再请另外一个。
And next, we would like to invite another Fortune 500 company. We have with us from Pepsi, the Chief Executive Officer of PepsiCo Greater China and Chief Consumer Officer at PepsiCo Asia Pacific. So we know that for climate change, it brings a lot of risks for a lot of enterprises and also for commerce and for the government. As a Fortune 500 company, how does Pepsi deal with the challenge? Yeah, so why is Pepsi here, right? Actually, it's pretty interesting. I want to thank the organizer for the invitation to share a bit about our thoughts and our practice. But more importantly, we want to share the work that we're doing. So today, you see a lot of masters and gurus here. We actually learned a lot from them, and I really benefited a lot. So as a food and beverage company, in terms of climate, why are we so concerned? The first thing is that every day, just like the consumers every day, we resonate with them every day. So in more than 200 countries and regions, we serve 1 billion of consumers every day. So those consumers, what they feel every day and the challenge they face every day will also resonate on our side. And in more than 60 countries and regions, every day we procure more than 30 different crops. For our food and beverage, we need the crops as the raw material and some auxiliary material. And the climate change for our supply chain is definitely an important factor. So for our end-to-end supply chain, it has a lot of implications. So on one hand, we stand with our consumers and we are feeling the climate challenge as a whole. And as an enterprise, every day we would be challenged by the climate change in terms of our supply chain. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we mentioned a lot about the energy use, but in the greenhouse gas emitted, 1/3 is from the food system. So in the food system, of course, we're talking about the end-to-end, and of course it starts with the growth and then the livestock and the fishery and also the production of and also the logistics, and that represents 1/3 of the emission. So we are heavily obligated to do our part in contributing to the climate change solutions. So, what are we thinking? Our concept is that we need to change it to by transitioning our business. It's not just about like using traditional fossil fuel or using clean energy. It's not just that choice, or what kind of cars we're using in the transportation, what kind of raw material we're procuring. It's not only that. We need to have this end-to-end perspective to transform from the whole picture perspective to transform the operation system. And therefore, with that guiding principle, internally, we're talking about this Pepsi Positive uh, initiative, which is about continuous and positive influence. For all of our work, we divide it into 3 pillars. The first, in agriculture, because we procure a lot of raw material. So, how do we achieve sustainable procurement, especially in agriculture? How we can make the agriculture sustainable? So in the world, in all of the markets, you enjoy our chips, Lay's chips. Every potato is actually produced in a sustainable way in agriculture.
And therefore, we have a major pillar in regenerative agriculture, and the second pillar lies in the entire value chain, all the way from manufacturing to transportation to the synergy between upper and downstream to see how we're going to lower down carbon emission. And that's actually what we do for the entire value chain. Thirdly, it's about how we're going to influence our consumers from the perspective of ours. How can we possibly have the diversity of food to have more options and choices for consumers, and maybe through the brand and touch points, how can we really positively influence our consumers to lower down their intake of sugar, salt, and oil and fat? And in this way, we might also kindly ask consumers to go with the less plastic solution, all the way from our business pillars to value chain, as eventually to our influence on consumers. And then for our practices here, we have our own thinking on the several enablers here. The first one is innovation. We need to be innovative by ourselves. We need to give full play to the scale of us. We have large scale, and we have our upper and lower string partners. And with the scale in place, we're going to explore more and new technologies, and then to achieve breakthroughs and try to constantly refine our technology and lower down the cost at the same time. And with that in place, we can take one step further to do the scale up. And that's actually the very positive flywheel that I'm talking about here. Several examples here are for your reference. Maybe I can draw attention towards several of them. For example, every day we're going to grow potatoes. And then how can we do that? Maybe through digitalization. We're going to really monitor the soil and also to monitor the growth of the plants or the potatoes. How can we really precisely do the irrigation and fertilization? And in this way, we can lower down the pressure for irrigation and fertilization. And also for manufacturing part, we're going to use natural gas and electricity. Of course, we're going to buy green electricity power here. And I have already told you that we've already got the agreement with Sinopec. You feel like you only enjoying potato chips. However, for the skin of the potatoes, they are actually used for power generation by us. And in this way, we can reduce the waste in the entire manufacturing process. Sometimes it can be transformed into even fertilizers and to be a part of the entire plantation process. And for the entire, I would say, value chain, we got transportation and biomass, biogas, boilers, And also we have the power generation part, and for those things, they are the scenario for applications. The first part is actually about application and be innovative. And secondly, it's about investment and incubation. Around the world, we have all those green bonds issued around the world. And in the Chinese market, we are so blessed because we got a lot of startups in China constantly exploring how they're going to be greener and better protect the environment and how they can really tap into emerging and state-of-the-art technologies. And in this way, we have funds in place to do incubation. For example, last year, we incubated a Chinese company, and by capturing carbon, it can more effectively transform them into organic fertilizer and be a part of the plantation. And maybe with investment and incubation, we are going to empower those startups. And thirdly, it's all about our influence of the brand to influence positively the consumers as well as upper and downstream players. In recent years, we see that we're supposed to bring together the entire value chain, and that can yield very good results. In the opening ceremony yesterday, Premier just talked about something that, in my view, was very nicely said, that if we work together, we can do much better together. And at Pepsi, we share the vision. We want to do our work well, while at the same time, by collaborating with partners in the entire value chain, we want to do things even better. Thank you. Obviously, you just take Pepsi as a very good example here. We talk about against the climate change, how we are going to develop ourselves, and of course develop trade. And obviously you got products in 200 countries around the world.
Dr. Fabian Zolik, because you are from the European Policy Center, and of course CCG is also very honored to collaborate with EPC for the last number of years. We have actually among the participants here, there's a number of 8, 9 different European think tanks representative that come this time with you, and we are also having another meeting in Hangzhou tomorrow. But I'd like to hear from you, from a think tank point of view. What's your take on this, of course, on sustainable trade development under the climate change condition? Maybe because of the time, we'll limit to 5 minutes. Thank you, Fabian.
Okay, thank you very much. Very glad to be here, and thank you also for the great cooperation we have across the board. Yes, I'll start with climate change, because I think what has already been mentioned but needs to be emphasized again and again is it is an existential issue. This is something we will have to address collectively, because it is about the future of humanity and the future of the planet. Yet, we are not doing enough, and that's a paradox. We are in a situation where the scale and the scope of what we're doing is nowhere near sufficient to address the exponential challenge which we are facing with climate change. So we've called this a progress illusion. Yes, we are making progress, but it is not fast enough. What is the reason behind that? I think there are 2 key reasons behind that. One has already been mentioned. It's the lack of an effective way of pricing in the negative externality, which is especially difficult because there's a cumulative element to it. It matters what we have done in the past, not only what we're doing at this moment in time. And the second issue is distributional. Climate change action has enormous distributional consequences within countries, between countries, and between generations. And that's very difficult to deal with. And in the absence of an effective global system, we have more and more countries around the world intervening to address one or both of these issues. And that then leads to distortions because they are all doing it in different ways. And I think this is where we are going to face a crucial question over the next years. And a lot of the debate we are having at the moment, for example, on electric vehicles, is already part of that. What is legitimate protection and what is protectionism, which is distorting trade and destroying overall welfare? And that's not an easy question to answer, because it depends very much on the perspective. It depends on the motivations behind why certain actions are taken. And it depends also on the absence of a global arbitrator which can say definitively, is it one or the other, and then enforce that action. Now, I think the WTO has been enormously important in the global system, but we are having severe problems, not least because the United States no longer seem to be supporting the mechanism. But we need some form of global mechanism to be able to decide this question, because otherwise we are going to continue to come back to this, because certainly both protection and protectionism are rising in the world at the moment. This is made especially difficult because it's not just about climate change. It is about a number of different public goals. It is about energy, it is about competitiveness, it is about industrial policy, about development, about security, about technology, and about geoeconomics. So all of that is coming together in this nexus of trade. So trade has to be many different things at the same time. It has to be free, it has to be fair, it has to be green, it has to not undermine country security, and all of that is creating tensions which we are going to continue to face. So one way we have to address that is to continue, and it has been emphasized again and again at this conference, that we work on the global multilateral system with all its faults, with all its difficulties, but it is the only thing we have got. And the absence of a global system is going to be much worse for everybody. No rules are always worse than any kind of rules which we can have. I think we have to have much better dialogue, and there I would also appeal to the Chinese side to not always take the worst view on what Europe is proposing. When we talk about the carbon border adjustment mechanism, maybe that should be a starting point for a global dialogue on how do we price carbon, rather than seeing it as a protectionist measure. So I think there's a lot more scope in cooperation and in dialogue. We have to address the global distributional dimension. That means looking at not only who benefits from these new technologies, but also who profits from these new technologies, and how can we share technology also with those countries which don't have the ability to develop them themselves. We have to find mechanisms to also share some of the benefits of, or the avoided costs of climate action now between generations. And there we really need the financial sector to step up. This is what the financial sector is good at, and we need to have much more mechanisms so that we are able to transfer those benefits into the present, which addresses the distributional one. And then at the end, yes, it is about global cooperation. It is also about healthy global competition. Both of those can work together. But in the absence of functioning international mechanisms, this will be very, very hard to achieve.
Thank you, Fabian. You made a lot of proposals, actually, from a think tank point of view. I think worthwhile to look into. And also, you mentioned about the EV cars and things like that. Actually, yesterday, Pascalami and Jacques Delors Institute, we had two events in Beijing, one roundtable, one launching event. We actually also made some proposals. For example, I think that 30 years ago, a European company, German company, come to China for JV to do the automobile market and all those good things. And now the EV car China is having a leading edge. Why can't we have a JV with all those companies again in China? Had a lot of working experience to that. And back to Europe and back to investing in Europe and many other countries. So cooperation could be a key. Let's change some narrative. Could be a possibility. So that's just a quick thought there. And now I'd like to invite David Blair. He's chief economist at Alliance of Global Talent Organization. Actually, our organization at CCG is also is part of that, and also you are vice president of CCG. We would like to hear from you. You have also taught at the Eisenhower College in Washington as a dean of economic department. As senior expert from U.S. too. So we'd like to hear from you. Now we know President Trump is going to be the next 4 years. What's your take as well? Thank you, David.
I'll wait to the end to say a little bit about President Trump, if that's okay. I want to make 6 quick points. One, the social effects of any policies to implement climate change or any other economic policy are critical. I mean, one key fact to the world is that in the United States, median real wages have not increased since 1979, since the series began. We had rapid increases in median real wages under the Roosevelt-era New Deal, which ended in about the mid-70s, but under the current under the current economic regime, median real wages have been constant. And that's not because the U.S. economy has not been growing. It's because money has been transferred from working class people and middle class people to a smaller elite group. Essentially, the percentage of GDP going to labor has gone from 65% to less than 59% today. I think what we're seeing today in the election is that is not politically sustainable. And I want to jump in. That is not China's fault. The trend began long before China became a player. And it's also probably not trade's fault, the fault of trade in general. It's mostly the fault of changes in the financial system and in failure to enforce antitrust law that started under Clinton, carried on through Bush, carried on in strength through Obama. That has caused a decline in the living standards of American working class people. And in any climate change legislation or policies, that has to be taken into account. I think part of what we're seeing is anger. A plumber who is told he can't drive his truck to work by a Hollywood star who's flying off to a climate party in the Mediterranean in a private jet is going to become angry, and rightly so. And you see the same thing with the French tradespeople, the Dutch farmers, etc. So that's one key point. The second key point is I think China has done a great job in reducing the cost of solar power. That is a critical fact. China has been very effective in reducing cost. I think really reducing cost of green policies is much more effective than any sort of complicated carbon trading agreement, which is complicated, difficult to enforce, and also subject to vast amounts of corruption. So I think China is leading the way in reducing the cost of solar. That will have a big change and a big effect on the world. China has been very effective at using government policies to create new industries. We used to be able to do that in the United States. I mean, government policies, essentially it was military spending, created the microelectronics industry, created the aviation industry, but most of the policies over the last 20 years or so have essentially accomplished nothing, and most people see them as a giveaway to political allies and political donors, etc. The third point is there are lots of other environmental goals besides just carbon restrictions. One advantage I see here in China is that the carbon reductions show benefits in the daily environmental life of people. Fixing the air in Beijing, that tremendously improved life quality. That's something people can see every day. So we need to aim at issues that can do that. Sometimes we see so-called global warming policies being used to override other environmental goals. For instance, there's an offshore wind farm being built in New England, which is threatening 3 different types of whales, which are endangered species. Ordinarily, they would have never been able to get a permit for that, but that was overridden. And things like that we should be very wary of that kind of thing. I also worry about the total effects of, say, lithium mining, things like that. What's the real effect on the long-term ecology? Okay, the fourth point is there are lots of existential threats in the world, and we need to take them into account. I think one that worries me just about every night is the threat of war and nuclear war. And we should not be taking risks along those lines. There are other threats. I think working class collapse is also an existential threat. I think China has a lot of experience with social collapse because every time there's a change in dynasty, it's shocking to Westerners. About 25 to 30% of the population died. That's incredible when you look at it. So avoiding social collapse is really critical. And I think it was because China had such a large population and a complicated system even back 1,000 years ago. And so the collapses there caused death in a system that was very vulnerable to change. But I think the rest of the world now is at a similar state, where any change in the system can cause tremendous damage. A couple more quick points. Well, I think this reinforces the price point. There is no deus ex machina. For the translators, that was, in ancient Greece, there was a god that came down at the end of the play and solved all the problems. There's no magic bullet like that that's going to solve our problems. We might get one. It might be cold fusion, who knows? It could be some sort of new cheap energy. That'd be great. But we can't count on it. I think we need to focus on what the real alternatives are. The biggest problem is coal. Coal is much more of a danger than other types of fossil fuels. I think it's a mistake to lump together fossil fuels. In the United States did not sign the initial Kyoto Protocol because it was voted down 95 to 0 in the U.S. Senate. But the United States was the only country that met its targets under the Kyoto Protocols. And that was not because of government policies. It was because fracking made natural gas cheap. So natural gas replaced coal and electricity production. Coal went from 70% of electricity production in the U.S. to 16% last year and 9% this year. And that's just because of driving down the price of natural gas. Okay. And the final point is, I think we need to be very open and transparent about the data and the models. I'm not a meteorologist. I know we have a meteorological expert here today, but my background is in economics and originally in mathematics. And I know a thing or two about building models. And actually, there was a famous meteorologist who was the chairman of the meteorology department at MIT named Edward Lorenz. And what he showed is that models of the type used in economics and the type used in meteorology don't work. They're not predictive. And the reason is that what he showed was that technically it's any big system, any system of simultaneous nonlinear equations are highly subject to changes in the inputs. So any change in the input, small, within the margin of error changes in the inputs can have qualitative changes in the results, which means the model really is not predictive. And that's the problem we face, and it's not a problem we can avoid. So we should be careful about being honest about the predictions, where they're going, what they're based upon, and make data available to everybody in the research community.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, David. You have outlined many risk, and we try to avoid. I'm particularly impressed about this working class collapse, which I think each government should really have a strong domestic policy to support this widening gap between rich and poor. I think that China probably did, in the last 4 decades, lifted 800 million people out of poverty to avoid exactly just that. So a lot of things we can learn from each other as well to avoid the collapse of the working class and coming back of the populism, nationalism, so that we made the world so dangerous now. So a lot of good points there. Unfortunately, we're running out of time for our panel because it's already 15 minutes overdone. So we probably have to stop there. But I really appreciate 7 top experts from Pascal, from Chairman Fu and Chairman Yu and Regner, and then from Paxi, Fabian and David. Let's give them a warm applause for their excellent sharing, and we want to summarize them. We're going to report them, and then we're going to make policy recommendations based on all your suggestions. Thank you so much, and thank you for the audience still here. Thank you.
Distinguished leaders, friends, good afternoon, everyone. Just now, the roundtable was very inspiring and the keynote speeches were very wonderful. Now, let me give you this report launch on this topic. So you might have already seen this bilingual report already. So for the Hongqiao Economic Forum, an important feature is we have very good topics, and they are very inspiring to our audience and readers. And I hope to share these ideas, viewpoints with you.
Bank, it's a bilingual report under the name of the Sustainable Trade Amid Global Climate Change. Please have a check. So you also can scan the QR at the back of the report. It's a bilingual one. 我们的这个报告呢，分成首先是
So the first part is the urgency in addressing climate change. We propose the idea of sustainable trade and mention its positive role. What's more, we analyze China, EU countries, as well as the US attitudes and actions on climate change and sustainable trade. So under this background, we propose the barriers and challenges in this context. What's more, for the governments and for all walks of life, we've proposed our strategic recommendations. So firstly, we understand the urgency in addressing climate change as mentioned by our experts. Over the past 5 years, we can see there is a 47% likelihood that the global temperature averaged over the entire 5-year period will exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial era, and it's going to damage the major industries such as agriculture, energy, infrastructure, and global supply chains, with severe consequences for developing countries that rely on these natural resources. So in terms of geopolitics, we can see that there are great challenges. Following the framework of Paris Agreement, governments around the world have formulated the NDCs to achieve this target. However, there is a gap between current actions and the actual efforts needed. So there are great challenges to be solved. And there's a positive role of sustainable trade in addressing climate change. It's really hard to define such positive role because currently there is no unified definition for sustainable trade. In our report, we believe that so under the current global trade system, products for sustainable trade primarily include those that contribute to reducing carbon emissions. So they are very important for carbon reduction and enhance energy efficiency, such as electric vehicles and solar PV equipment. And here's a trend of sustainable trade, which is very distinct. According to recent data, we can see the EVs and the solar products, they are developing rapidly with a very positive trajectory, and that is needed by the current green development trend as well. And just now we discussed the attitudes by China, the US, as well as European countries on sustainable trade. So in our report, we've summarized these attitudes and actions on climate change.
So China is pretty consistent. We mentioned about the 2030 carbon peaking and 2060 carbon neutrality, and the 14th five-year plan very clearly stipulated the carbon reduction. We have a lot of policies to support that. The UN reports also stated that China needs to invest at least 100 trillion to 170 trillion RMB, which is massive. So in terms of strengthening international cooperation and also enhanced policy mechanism and regulations, we are also promoting pretty fast. For the U.S., it's more complex because things are not so consistent. Under different administrations, things are always swinging. So you can see the trend of the general election this time. Trump may come back, and it may provide some challenges to the global trade. I won't say too much, because during the Biden administration, they also have the Inflation Reduction Act, providing some protectionism, but then we still need to wait to see what Trump would do. And EU also had the CBAM and also the European Green Deal and the Net Zero Industry Act. It's pretty consistent, and we expect that in the next decade they will use 1 trillion to facilitate the sustainable economic actions. And we do have some of our exploration. I quoted from Yi Xiaozhen. The green transition must comply with WTO rules, and the success of China's renewable energy sector is driven more by market competition and technological innovation rather than relying on solely the government subsidies. So, green transition in compliance with WTO rules is the preset, and then we need to play our role. But the market-driven innovation is more sustainable. Then for the sustainable trade is facing a lot of challenges because different countries are doing this subsidy race, and actually developed countries are giving more subsidy than the developing states. And also the tariff barrier is pretty obvious, and there is the trade friction between China and Europe, and people also talked about that. The other thing is WTO is weakening. As the core multilateral institution for global trade, the WTO is facing some challenges, and multilateralism is on the decline. And we also have some recommendations for promoting sustainable trade. First, to formulate sustainable trade policies and optimize the structure of the green products. Second, deepen bilateral, multilateral, and regional cooperation. We also need the cooperation and coordination among major global economies like China, EU, and the US. The fourth is promote low-carbon standards and strengthen international cooperation, and promote South-South cooperation to achieve common development in sustainable trade, and expand the import of green products and promote market diversification. And strengthening international cooperation in green industry chain is very important. We also need to deepen international cooperation in the field of green finance. We also need to promote international mutual recognition of green product certification and labeling. And we also want to mobilize the different Chamber of Commerce and multinational companies to strengthen the capacity building for sustainable trade and promote the coordinated development among all countries. And apart from consolidating the consensus, during the interviews, I always say that CIIE is really something, and Hongqiao Forum is an important stage to set the agenda. So we are announcing this report today. We hope that people can get better understanding on the meaning and significance of global trade. So this report is developed and released by CCG. We're one of the top 100 CCG, and we cooperate with CIIE for many years and promoting the agendas and influential topics. Thank you. And in your brochure, you will see our report, bilingual report. Thank you. Thank you, CCG, for your support. And thank you for bringing us this inspiring report. Now let's start the views from green industries, navigate trade and sustainability dialogue. So we will have the moderator, Ms. Zhang Shanhui, the TV anchor and commentator at CGTN. Let's welcome the facilitator and the panelists. Distinguished guests, good afternoon. Welcome to today's CIIE. So we're about to start the third session, which is our panel discussion. And the content is about the green industry development and trade sustainability. So I am from CGTN, the commentator Zhang Shanhui.
This seventh edition of CIIE. So I'm Zhang Shanhui, anchor at CGTN, part of China Media Group. Et je parle aussi français, donc je suis présentatrice, journaliste et commentatrice de CGTN en français, qui fait partie de China Media Group. Quel privilège aussi de pouvoir parler le français, en effet, pour mieux comprendre et aussi promouvoir la coopération et les relations entre la Chine, la France et surtout avec le monde francophone. So today I'm very, very glad to invite all our guests here already seated. 所以呢，首先先允许我
So please allow me to introduce to you the guests today. We have invited
the co-chair of the Europe-Asia Center and former Norwegian Minister of Environment and International Development, and who is also the former UN Undersecretary General and Executive Director of the UNEP. 同时呢，和我们
Also with us, we have General Manager of Wuliangye Yibing Company Limited, Hua Tao. Let's welcome. And also with us,
because I'm very glad that we have today, Mr. Solheim in all about the China-Europe macroeconomy and also the political initiatives in this research direction. And we have also a representative, Mr. Hua Tao, who is representing the whole food and beverage industry in China. And we have also, in the other part, in the other side of the world, we have Ms. Kale, who is also the president of the Cargill Agricultural Supply Chain, very important in all the supply chain agricultural ones in the international cooperation with China. And we have also Mr. Duran, Global Vice President at Baker Hughes. And we also have, 我们还有2位重磅的
and we still have two heavyweight Chinese guests. One is the Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer of JA Solar, Sun Guangbing. The other is the founding president of China Biodiversity, Conservation and Green Development Foundation, president of World Academy of Sustainable Development, Zhou Jinfeng. Let's give a big round of applause to welcome all of the guests upstage. Thank you.
No, roundtable discussion. And I also bring my phone here to have a look at time, because we have very limited time. So I will invite all our guests to make a speech of 5 to 6 minutes before that we go into a free discussion for this second round. So the first thing that I would want to share with all our clients and all our public here is that today we're focusing on 3 subjects. 所以我们今天的整个的圆桌讨论
So we have 3 different directions and agenda items. So we're very glad that we have the experts of the macroeconomics and also the representatives from the enterprises. And today, we will talk about how the transition of the enterprises drive the sustainable trade. We will also focus on the cross-industry ecosystem cooperation, like different industries, how they collaborate to reach the sustainable goal. And the third topic is we also need to pay attention to policy support and the market support. In different fields, with different roles, the country, government, and enterprises, and the NGOs, how we cooperate to reach green development.
First question goes to you. Mr. Soham, we actually met each other yesterday at the opening ceremony of the CIIE, and I'm very impressed by your insight on China and Europe relations, and you yourself has always been working between these two parts which are most important parts today in the world stage. And I would like to know, given that you are a specialist and expert in China and Europe relationship and policies and all your governmental and public experiences, what's your take? How do you see the impact of the policy support and market mechanism on industry, green cooperation, and also the sustainable trade? And also because you have been minister in the green development and energy sector. So do you have any good examples to share with our international public? Are there any great examples that you find that between China and Norway, or between China and Europe, that you would like to share with us, please?
Thank you so much. And obviously, whatever successful nation in the green transformation and indeed in development have been successful on the same basis. There must be a strong government to set the direction, give the vision, and regulate the markets. And there must be the vibrancy of business, on the business can scale, innovate, and take the products forward. So wherever you look for a success, whether it's in China or Europe, or under Prime Minister Modi in India, wherever you look for success, it's this mix. So there's no other way. So just have that as the basis. Let me make two main points. I mean, one I made earlier, just to reiterate, we need to defend trade. Europe and China need to work together to defend trade, and that will be even much more important when Trump now becomes the president of the United States of America. Without trade, we will be much poorer, and the green transformation will take a much longer time. And to defend trade, Europe should kind of be a little bit more self-confident, believe a little bit more in ourselves, believe in our ability to compete, and start competing with China in green areas. The CBAM, which was mentioned earlier, that's, in my view, a rational response from Europe, because in order to, say, make the European steel industry competitive in the green transformation, Europe said, yes, we want to make sure that happens, but then we cannot be undermined by low-cost products where the salaries are lower and the environment standards are lower from, say, China or any other parts of the world. That's a rational response, and it calls for a dialogue as to how to implement this in a real manner. But what's happening now? Europe is saying, oh, China's so advanced, so much ahead of us. The Chinese the Chinese electric cars, electric batteries, windmills or solar panels are so much more advanced that we can do. Then we put tariff on Chinese products. That's not a rational response. That's the response of the loser who struggle to compete, and we need to start competing rather than having this very defensive attitude. On the Chinese side, China should do more to make sure Western companies, or indeed companies from all other parts of the world, succeed in the Chinese market. Chinese market is enormous, it's highly competitive, it's not easy, but help other companies to be successful here. They will be your advocates. Just one example, until very recently there were a few Western wind companies who were quite successful in Europe. I don't think there is now any Western company really successful in the wind industry in China. Maybe because companies like, say, Goldwind are so enormously competitive. They make the biggest and best windmills in the world. But it will be good if there were some Western wind companies successful in China, because they will be the bridge to Europe. And China needs to invest abroad to create jobs in other destinies. Then the other main point, which is a follow-up of the previous discussion. Yes, we need cooperation, but we also need a much more people-centered approach. Because, I mean, we heard any number of examples as to how the working class in North America and Europe have felt threatened and not developing. And that's at the core also of the election in the United States today. Look, if you are a young Asian American woman in California, the chance you are voting for Kamala Harris is close to 90%. If you are an old carpenter, my age in Oklahoma, and white and man, the chance of voting for Donald Trump is more than 90%. It's a total divide, rural to city, to some extent young to old, but mainly rural to city, modern to the traditional. We can't overcome that in Western society, we will struggle. United States is totally polarized, but Europe is not so polarized, but we have some of the same issues. And if we transform these to China, please make sure that the environment movement of China is not just for the young and trendy in Shenzhen or Shanghai or Hongqiao, but that the environment movement is also for the coal worker in Shanxi, or the farmer in Henan, or the industrial worker in Heilongjiang. Because unless we embrace everyone and make this a fair transition, we will struggle. And let me end, you asked for success stories, but we can also learn from failures. Let me tell you one of the biggest failures we did in Norwegian government and what is to be learned from that. When I was in Norwegian government, we were very firm that we wanted to develop a huge wind industry in Norway. And we came from a top-down technological and financial angle how to develop that. And we only discussed what's the best technology and what's the best financial mechanism to implement this wind industry. And then we started. But then all of a sudden people said, what is in this for me? What is in this for my community? Maybe this is good for the world. Maybe it's good for the universe. Maybe it's even good for Norway. But it's not good for me and my children and grandchildren, so I don't want it. And then there was such a buildup of resistance to wind energy in rural communities in Norway that now the government cannot implement any wind at land at all because of this resistance. Only offshore wind is possible in Norway at this stage because of this enormous setback from people. And look, all the big investments in renewables, solar farm I saw in Xinjiang, 4 gigawatt, as in similar in Gansu, in Mongolia, they are enormous. That's how they can replace fossil fuels. Cannot replace fossil fuels being small and cozy. They can do it because they're big. But if you want to make that in a rural community, you need to have a dialogue with people. And there must be some of the profit and windfalls remaining with the local community. Otherwise, you will see resistance. You see it in Europe, in America, you will see it in India, you will see it in China, you will see it everywhere. So, these are my 2 main advice. Let's cooperate to make trade flowing and become more green and more rich together. And let's make sure that the green transformation is people-centered. Business cannot thrive if people don't want this change. Politicians cannot really lead if people are not with them. So we need to have a much more focus on how to bring people on board, and all sorts of people, not just the trendy ones.
Thank you for this intervention. As a fact, we can learn from success stories and also from failures, and I appreciate that you gave a very vivid examples, even if it didn't come out as a good result, but still a very good lesson for us to learn and also to reinitiate and also to readdress the importance of cooperation between China and Europe. And it is also part of the role of the Europe-Asia Center in promoting cooperations between 2 parts. 那么我们下面的一个问题给到我们的吴良业。
And next question will be for the representative coming from Wu Liangye. And thank you, Mr. Hua Tao, for being here with us and to be here answering the questions related to green transformation. We all know Wu Liangye is actually specializing in food and beverage. And for the green transformation or sustainable trade development, I would say Chinese liquor is a very well-established and traditional Chinese industry. And in 2021, I remember for Wu Liangye, you were about to establish such a zero-carbon liquor company, and you are the first one of its kind in China doing so. How did you really put that into practice? And how do you view that Chinese enterprises are in a good position to initiate and embrace green transformation for development? Thank you. You just talk about the sustainable trade amid climate change. I feel like there are 3 things I'd like to bring on the table. First of all, for sustainable trade amid climate change, for the top design, at Wu Liangye, there are 3 things. First of all, we need to have our macro view to take good care of our environment as well as nature as a whole. For low carbon development, it can really be reflected by our products offerings. Secondly, for the manufacturing or production of the products, and also in the packaging or distribution of the products, we do need to set our eyes on the entire value chain to make sure it's going to be eco-friendly. And thirdly, for our partners, be it for partners in transportation or suppliers, they might need to have similar low carbon as well as environmentally friendly awareness to make sure the standards are met by our products. And then back to your question, why Wu Liangye had such an idea in the first place? Then we would really have to talk about the decision made by the Yibin local government. Anything that's so special to green transformation, without policy support, without the local government support or the local party committees support, there's no way for us to achieve that. For Yibin, that's actually the source of Yangtze River in China. And for Yangtze River, in its Shanghai segment, is about 2.28 thousand kilometers away from Yibin, and therefore we are really sharing a lot with Shanghai. We got one white and one black thing in Yibin. For white, it's about liquor. However, for black, it refers to coal. However, coal is not sustainable and it's a fossil fuel, and that can really create a lot of problems for the environment. And therefore, in 2019 and onwards, Yibin decided to transform its development model. We have one white, one blue, and one green. One blue means digital technology, and for one green refers to PV as well as battery industry. Obviously, we got representative coming from JA Solar as well. And also, we boosted our PV industry in Yibin thanks to their efforts. And given the guidance from the local government and CPC committee, we really attached a lot of importance towards green development of ourselves. And we have really paid our price to not just to fully tap everything we had in our city to develop ourselves, but also promoting the development ourselves by taking good care of the environment according to the instruction given by President Xi Jinping. And that's the reason why we would like to put in place the net zero factory there in Yibin. Then how can we possibly achieve that and make sure it can be developed in the long run? Basically, there are 5 considerations. First of all, it's about lowering down the carbon emission. We now use different process and methods. For example, using solar energy and other renewable energy. It can help reduce carbon emission by 7%, ranking us in the first position. Secondly, we're going to reduce the pollutants discharge, for example, for the wastewater. We're going to use recycling water system. And with that, we're going to reduce the water usage of 0.7 million tons. And also, we have used the very eco-friendly first and second level sewage treatment system. We have our own wastewater discharge standards, and with our wetlands in place, we can make sure that the water discharged by us is actually in the 3rd category, which has obviously higher quality than the industry average. And also from gas to electricity, from coal to gas use, with all those various approaches, we can save a lot of energy, and as a result, the energy consumption has been brought down. And fourthly, we're going to really improve the coverage of greenness. For our city, 60% of the land are actually covered by green plantation in our industrial park. And we have a lot of little animals like little birds and squirrels there. And in this way, we really achieve the harmony between human being and the nature. And finally, it's about synergistic development. Overall speaking, Wu Liangye requires own local specific climate conditions. And therefore, we're going to make full use of the land and soil in place. That is to make full use of the water, soil, environment, and also all those organisms locally to build the best possible ecosystem to make sure our products will always be sustainable. And I would say for food products, they are the fundamentals. However, more important than that is the ecosystem. And that is the reason why we're going to further step up efforts in building green factory. Thank you so much. Obviously, you mentioned the color change from color and white to white plus green plus blue. Today, Wuliangye has become one of the leaders in the industry in China. And currently, Wuliangye is constantly improving itself while at the same time to have those inter-sector collaboration. Maybe from this perspective, could you please share with us several examples as in how you really put into practice this collaboration? You mentioned about the geographical favorable conditions as well as local government support. What are some of the other innovative ideas you'd like to share with us? Like how you're going to really cooperate with other leaders or leading enterprises in other sectors? Thank you. And I feel like that's what we do at Wuliangye Group. Basically, we got two pillars. The first one, that is Wuliangye Corporation. The other one is Wuliangye Group. And both of them are actually focusing on environmental protection. And you just asked me what kind of a collaboration we had. For example, we got a collaboration with PV industry. And just now I talked to the representative coming from JA Solar, and for PV industry in Yibin, it boasted its capacity of 100 gigawatt. And obviously you also mentioned the PV is booming in Inner Mongolia as well. And I feel like that has a lot to do with Yibin's PV industry's development as well. And for Wuliangye, we had injected such capital to really create such PV enterprise. For example, for Infadeyao Heguangtongcheng, and for laundry green energy, like HPC 16 gigawatt project signed yesterday, that showed how we are going to throw ourselves into the green transition. And secondly, for all of our collaboration, from the cap of Wuliangye to the bottle itself, and to all the packaging of Wuliangye spirit, they all have to be environmentally friendly. For example, the printing part or the printing ink we use, there have to be environmentally friendly, and also for the distillers' grains, they have to be biodegradable or biodegraded. And for us, for those rooftop at the plains of Wuliangye, we try to make a plan for that. Maybe by 2027, we're going to have this green and low carbon solar energy power generation so as to ensure the supply of power is there for us. In this way, we can really save 50 million kilowatt hours capacity each year. And be it for investment in products or our initial requirements for our products, we're going to try to do everything we can to get ourselves on sustainable development path. And one more thing, please do not take for granted that Wuliangye has only one public company. Actually, we have got Yibin paper making subsidiary that had already gone public, and by working on the pulp, for example, and making it really eco-friendly, we try to take care of the environment as well. And I know that in the future, anyway, we are going to step our efforts in protecting the environment even better. And maybe one day we're looking forward to your new design featuring the bamboo package for the Chinese spirit. Oh, so it's bamboo alcohol for Wuliangye.
Agriculture supply chain in the Asia Pacific region. We know that Cargill is actually a very big enterprise in the food supply and in all the agricultural product supply. And so my question is about how does this enterprise, especially in your work in China, what specific measures has Cargill taken to reduce the carbon emission and also to promote the sustainable development in its agricultural supply chain?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to be here today. It's actually my first time to attend this forum and the first time to attend CIIE. And actually, I've been super impressed with the quality of the discussions. And I'll be very open. I joined the panel in the hope to talk about the importance of open and free trade, but I see it's a general theme, and so I really don't need to comment on that. And it's great to see it's so widely acknowledged. If I may, Cargill is a family-owned company committed to the safe, responsible and sustainable production of agriculture and products and services, or I should say agricultural and food. As a major player in the global food chain, we create and deliver products that are actually vital for everyday life. Just for some background, we are supported by over 150,000 employees globally, and we operate in 70 countries, and we're privileged to serve 125 customers in 125 different countries. So the question to what we're doing in our supply chain, perhaps let me answer it what we're doing and then what we're trying to encourage in the wider supply chain.
Sure.
Because it's absolutely imperative that we collaborate across the supply chain. We certainly can't do it on our own, but we are trying to do everything within our power to make a difference. So within our own operations, like many other companies we heard, we've been focused on reducing our own GHG emissions. And so we set our Scope 1 and Scope 2, so within our own operations, to be a reduction of 10% in absolutes, and so in a growing business that makes it more difficult, of course, because it's an absolute reduction, a 10% reduction off a 2017 baseline. I'm pleased to say that we achieved that actually at the end of 2022, so we were just over 10.9% absolute reduction. And so the way we did that, it was just lots and lots of small efforts. Like there was no magic bullet. There was no single solution. It was just, lots and lots of different approaches and different approaches in different regions. Specifically in China, we're focused on reducing energy use, because if we can't make it greener, and I'll talk about that in a second, we're absolutely focused on the amount of energy that we use, absolutely, and per metric ton of production. We've also been trying to buy and purchase green energy where we can. We're also using solar panels where we can, because obviously that's a nice and easy solution. Wherever we can, electric vehicles, batteries, it's not so much in heavy trucking, of course, but that's something that we're trying to move towards. Across the globe, I'll just maybe, because we're talking about
global challenges, right?
Pardon?
I was thinking global challenges, right? We were talking about the global challenges.
Oh, global challenges? I was just going to use some different examples, but I can talk about across the supply chain, if that's helpful. So across the supply chain, I think we're focused on trying to work with actually farmers at one end, and we're central in the supply chain. So we help farmers connect to markets, we help markets connect to farmers. And so we've been very focused on regenerative agriculture, and that's super important for actually farmers, but it needs to be economic for farmers to be successful, because if it's not, if it just puts a cost burden completely on the farmer, obviously that won't work. And there's lots of places, we've got lots of different approaches in different countries depending on what the problems are. But in the US, as an example, we're working with farmers to reduce the tillage. That's not an issue in Australia. In Australia, you actually have minimum tillage as a very baseline agricultural practice, but in the US, that's somewhere where we're working with them on minimum tillage. And in China, we've been just working with governments on research and development to understand actually what needs to be done in the in regenerative agricultural space.
Thank you very much for this insightful speech, and I do hope to get more examples in future in this cooperations with Chinese market. So now let's all move to Mr. Duran, who works in one of the most important high-tech energy company in the energy industry. So my question is, as you are today the global vice president at Baker Hughes, so given the challenges of decarbonization, which is today a general topic for Chinese industry and also for all the international industries, how can the cross-sector cooperation being conducted effectively to support these industries in reducing the carbon emission, please?
So thank you for the question. So first, maybe a quick introduction about the company I work for. So Baker Hughes started 120 years ago and is today the largest portfolio on energy technology. We starting accompanying, empowering the rise of oil. Then after the war, we start accompanying and powering the rise of gas. Today, we have a very large portfolio in geothermal. We have started developing hydrogen technology. So as the energy industry comes, so it comes our portfolio, and so comes the changes that we see necessary for us to adapt. So the question, I think, is very relevant, and it connects to all the rest of the panels that I heard today, because everybody talks about the energy transition, but they talk about the energy transition and the energy expansion, because the need for energy is just going to increase. The transition is a need, but you know the famous trilemma that everybody talks about, it means that it needs to be sustainable, it needs to be affordable. And to me, the need for collaboration among industries is intrinsically linked to the fact that this is a complex equation to be resolved, and if you do not collaborate between industries, it's not going to work. And I think that probably where we have already large participation, and is probably the best example in this, is when, and it was mentioned in the previous panel, you know, when we start looking at carbon capture, storage, and utilization. So company like our own one, and specifically what my team does, is understanding the subsurface for the storage space. But at the same time, the carbon that is captured can be utilized, but utilization is definitely not what we have done, or what the majority of our customers, which are oil and gas companies, do. There are companies that understand a lot better how you can utilize CO2. So now you start looking at a coordination. What is the best use for carbon that you capture? Are you going to utilize it? Can you make it? Can you bring fertilizing technology into it? Or it's a more efficient way to use it, which is stored underground, or use it for enhanced oil recovery. So when you look at this and you look at the necessity of all these different industries which have never collaborated before to actually become one ecosystem and collaborate. And very often these companies are in completely different parts of the world. Then you see that this challenge can only be truly solved if you can create a network of technological collaboration, a network of financial collaboration, and all this, of course, powered by carbon pricing market, which is transparent and covers the globe. No? So creating this environment is what I think is the challenge that is in front of us. As at Baker Hughes, we are very proud of the fact that having worked in basically every possible country that you can name, you know, we have a lot of experience in doing this cross-country, cross-technology collaboration. So we're very excited about what's coming, but we're also very conscious of the challenge ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very impressed by how this company strived itself during the years to explore different domains, to explore different energies, and I find it's very passionate and also excelling during the time, and that's very courageous in this way. So let's move on because we were talking about energy, and I just remember that Mr. Blair, who was in the previous panel, just talked about that China was one of the actor in reducing the price of the solar energy across the world. And basically here we have one representative of the solar technology in China, who is from JA Solar Technology. 那我们下面就把话筒时间交给金。
Next, we'd like to give the floor to Sun Guangbing, Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer from JA Solar. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for attending the 7th CIIE this time. And just as we discussed, China's solar energy is very important to reducing the costs. And JA Solar is a leading company in China in solar power. So from your point of view, from your experience, based on your experience, the industrial green development, from the perspective of JA Solar, how in the international market we're able to benefit the Chinese consumers and provide a better solution for the global community with the solar solutions, and then to promote the sustainable trade in the world with new opportunities. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Currently, in the world, the solar industry has been on the rise, and it's in line with WTO's framework, and it is indispensable from the WTO framework. In the case of JA Solar, currently our output is 100 gigawatt every year annually, so it accounts for around 16 to 70% of the global total, already at a high level. So 65% of our capacity is exported to countries around the world. In total, 165 countries and regions with a very large coverage, totaling 200 gigawatts. So it's like planting 200 million trees around the world, reducing carbon emissions. So these solar panels have helped to reduce the 20 billion tons of carbon emissions for the world. So sustainable trade is very important, and Solar Power Corporation is a demo case. So for China, for Southeast Asia, our business coverage has been on the rise, and we're going to set up factories in Europe and the US as well. So we believe the electricity generated by renewable sources is going to be promoted worldwide, and the PV industry has to be in line with the WTO rules, including anti-dumping, anti-subsidy rules. And in this process, it's very interesting to find one issue, and that is when we are trying to promote green energy, we meet some barriers, we meet some tech barriers and the rules related to carbon emissions. So they have actually helped the PV industry in meeting the requirements in manufacturing as well as in operation for reducing carbon emissions. So for over a decade, we are cooperating with the world in the solar industry, in the PV industry. Together, we are contributing to carbon emission reduction in the world. And the green energy, green electricity has accounted for 30% of the world's total energy consumption last year. So we promised to the world that by 2050, we are going to reach carbon neutrality. It's very hard for a manufacturing company to do so, to make this commitment. And it requires a cooperation from our researchers and the researchers around the world. So in this context, we are proposing 3 cores for the world. The first core, the first initiative is we have to co-build this green industry. So not only our own company, but we need to work with the energy storage companies and hydrogen generation companies, as well as other applications in the industry, other companies in the industry. We have to co-build this green chain together. So the second strategy is that we have to work with our suppliers as well as our suppliers and our users, consumers, together we have to reduce the carbon emissions.
To reduce the factors that affect the climate of the Earth. And the third is to bridge. So we need to go green to great. So we need to contribute to Mother Earth to make it more beautiful and cleaner. That is a great enterprise. So for JA Solar, in the future, we would like to go with all stakeholders that love green power, that want to deal with the climate change to build the Earth a better place. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sun, for the sharing. I think it's not only to the Chinese enterprises, for the global enterprises, European, US, or Southeast Asia, or even African enterprises, you are providing this new train of thought. So the last guest, I think, will share with us from a more macro perspective, because we have the privilege to have Mr. Zhou Jingfeng, the founding president of China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation. And you also participated in a lot of international biodiversity cooperation initiatives of China and other countries. So from your perspective, how do you understand the national policy and industry policy and the macroeconomic mechanisms, and how they provide assistance to the sustainable development and trade for China and the world? How do you view the macro decisions? So in the past, Professor Jürgen Landis, I invited him to be the director of the Beijing Biocivilization Institute, and he said to me that what he said about Europeans and Norwegians, and he talked about Chinese. When we deal with the future, you have a lot of systematic advantage. Why? Because we're faced with this change that presents itself only once in 100 years. And I added that actually we are facing this one change that presents itself once in 65 million years. So now we're in this widely distinction wave. So in the past, that was, the last time was the Cretaceous age. So that was the dinosaur. And right now, we are faced with this great change that presents itself once in every 65 million years. And in that stage, he said a strong government is very helpful for adapting to that environment, because the government can adjust very quickly compared to the traditional market economy. This makes more sense. And then there's COVID, and then the new three documents, or the spirits, that proven his forecast. So what I want to say is the national policy, industry policy, and a strong government is pretty helpful at this urgent moment and this sudden changes. The government can use the policy to effectively and quickly change. So now, for the PV industry, it is going so well in the world, and the EV is going so strong in the world. Of course, it is thanks to the contribution of the scientists and the entrepreneurs, but it couldn't have been achieved without the national policies, which is very crucial. So as a whole, it could become a role model for the different countries, especially the developing countries. So we need to use policy measures to quickly adjust and comprehensively utilize the market economy. So Mr. Sun, he thanked WTO because the open global trade and the stock-based and enterprise and market economy is definitely great lessons to our country that is very efficient in resource allocation. Through the resource allocation and the market comparison, the good things will stand out very quickly. So I think the host gave a very meaningful question. We have the national policy and the industry policy and market economy. They are all important tools. We need to fully utilize their advantages. China will definitely have a lot of growth in the future, but other countries should also maybe learn from this. Eric shared very good views. Apple is good, right? So then they are making the cell phone for the world. And if China is doing so well in PV, then we can just produce that to the world, right? Why? Because the high-tech product, the cost of carbon emission and biodiversity is the lowest. And why did we need to have the sustainable trade and the division of labor? And for different people, and even with the rise of nationalism, still humankind is still faced with this daunting challenge and a lot of crisis. And the river will definitely still flow east. The historic megatrend will not be stopped by protectionism. And also, like Europe is having this carbon tariff, I cheer for that. It's not perfect, but it is quickly adjusting the enterprise's attitude towards carbon. So in 1960s and 1970s, we have the food stamp. Back then, you cannot just use money because food was in short supply. And right now, carbon is the urgent issue. In the future, the quota of carbon will still be in tight supply. So in the future, the trade is not just about good product, good performance, low price. That's not enough. You need to have low carbon footprint. The three parameters will impact on your global market. Why? Because the human being is faced with this climate crisis. And there's the new literature saying that with the 5 extinction waves, there is the El Nino effect, and for the 2 million year history of mankind, we never ran into that. But the last time was 100 million years ago. So this El Nino effect, the long-term evolution of the climate, will definitely have this kind of disruptive effect on the ecosystem. So right now, we're seeing a lot of floods, extreme weathers. That's not extreme enough. It will be more extreme because although we have made great efforts, but this trend didn't get reversed, didn't stop, or even slow down. So in the future, our challenge will be even more. So we will definitely continue hitting the wall until we change our methods. So the cost of ecosystem and the climate, they will be closely related to our trade. So from the macro perspective, all developing countries and developed countries should actively study how to use policy to promote positive changes so that the advantageous products, not only in price and quality, but also in terms of the cost in biodiversity and eco impact, it can be more promoted. So for example, our PV panels are not only cheap, the smart grid technology is also outstanding. So for the PV panel, it is not sustainably and stably producing the electricity. Without smart grid, then you don't have that adaptability. So for that technology, if we don't share that, then whole mankind will have their limit in dealing with climate change. So we not only need to share the good products, we also need to share our good experience. This will be the way to lead the solution of dealing with climate change and biodiversity crisis. We may have the temporary things like this gentleman or that lady will become president, or there can be some temporary setbacks, but that doesn't change the mega trend. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zhou, for the sharing. So you shared from a more macro perspective, and you gave the Chinese method or philosophy.
Second part of this discussion， 我们现在马上要开始我们第二部分的自由讨论的环节。实际上，自由讨论
So free discussion and free topics Actually, after listening to the sharing and also in the last two parts, I think the thing that impressed me is about internationalization.
Have more cooperations with the foreign enterprises, and it's the same thing for foreign enterprises to conquer and to come into the Chinese market. So I would like that we brought this subject about international cooperation. So I would like to have your take on what's the most biggest challenges and uncertainty today in this international society, and also what is the biggest opportunity that all enterprises, European ones, Chinese ones, American ones, and African ones need to take the advantage of to enter into the Chinese market. We start with whom? Anyone want to give it a try? 来，有请。
Please. So just now, Eric really gave brilliant remarks. For China, we need to open our arms. Like Eric said, we need to welcome with open arms the outstanding international companies to come to China. And that is the purpose of CIIE. And that is why we're gathered here. Only by doing so, we can deal with the crisis, because global cooperation is the inevitable choice. This is the fundamental thing. And the other thing is, for our enterprises to go global, we need to get deeply involved into the employment, policy, and taxation of the local. Because for a lot of Chinese enterprises, they are already starting doing so. Not just doing the CSR, not only just help alleviating poverty and doing more in education. Now they're doing more in biodiversity and climate change, and they're actively getting involved in the healthy development of the local community. And that is the future direction. Thank you.
Mr. Soheim, you just mentioned that there are many opportunities that Chinese enterprises and European enterprises need to take advantage of right now. So what's the biggest opportunity that you would recommend a European enterprise to take advantage of when entering in the Chinese market?
I think the big opportunity is exactly what we are discussing. I mean, solving the climate crisis is an enormous business opportunity. And those nations who have taken that perspective, China is one, but India is another one, is very successful. Those nations who just see climate as a problem. I mean, obviously it's a huge problem, which we have all discussed. I mean, many people hinted to that. But it's also an enormous opportunity to create jobs, to make profit for shareholders, to make your nation strong. So all those nations who see that opportunity, they are the winners. Let me give you one example. I mean, China had no real brand in the old automobile economy. Nothing like, say, Toyota. Everyone knows Toyota. Up in my mountains back home in Norway, everyone knows Toyota. But if you go into the jungles of Africa, everyone knows Toyota there also. There's nothing like that in China. So what did China do? Leapfrog into the electric vehicle economy, where it was taking the lead and become very competitive. And now BYD, maybe the biggest electrical vehicle company in the world. You have NIO, Hongqiao, and Geely, and a huge number of others. Maybe 10 Chinese companies are globally competitive. Maybe all of them will not succeed, but some of them. So that perspective is an opportunity. Another global leader with the same perspective, which maybe not so often appreciated in China, is Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. I listened to him the other day in his home state of Gujarat. He spoke for 1 hour. He never mentioned the problems of climate change, just opportunity, the enormous opportunity for India to bring all Indians out of poverty, create jobs and prosperity, but doing that by going green. And I think that perspective is what will be the winning perspective in the world. You ask, what is the biggest problem? The biggest problem is our lack of ability to work together. because humanity are facing huge challenges. But humanity were facing huge challenges in the past also, but we have climate change, destruction of environment, still poverty in some parts of the world, we have potential for pandemics, and we have wars in Ukraine, Middle East, Sudan. None of these crises are unsolvable if we work together. All of them will be more difficult to resolve if we don't work together. So please, in China, don't speak negatively about the United States of America. Look for opportunities to work with the West. But of course, the message to the West is exactly the same. I'm so tired of all those media and others in the West who just find difficulties and problems with China rather than seeing the opportunities and the positives.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solheim. And to talk about the importance of getting together and the importance of cooperation. And I would also want to say that today China has also aims to build its professional capacity for its young Chinese students and Chinese young workers, to give them more power, to empower them in their career success and especially in their professional career development. So actually we have already succeeded largely the time. It was, normally it was 30 minutes ago. So again, many thanks to all our guests today on the stage, and also many thank you to you to participated and being part of this discussion. 同时呢，也非常感谢各位的嘉宾的到来。
Thank you so much for your coming. And once again, I would like to thank all those leaders on the stage. Thank you for sharing your ideas with us. Let's just stay tuned for a green or greener, more sustainable collaboration model and environment as a whole. Again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much. So much for the openings ceremony of the event, as well as two roundtable discussions from different perspectives. We talk about the climate change megatrend, green collaboration, as well as green industry's sustainable development path, and also the future of sustainable trade. And there are a lot of forward-looking insights, ideas, and solutions, be it for global governance or the fiscal policy adjustments in different countries, or transformation or innovation of technologies, application scenarios. We require collaboration and even more cooperation with each other. And I would say they play their very indispensable role in advancing the global trade, while at the same time for China's socioeconomic development is accelerating its own green transition. It's going to provide more momentum for development for global trade. For climate change, it represents challenge but also opportunity for collaboration. Here at the Hongqiao International Economic Forum, we put together the wisdom to better rise against those challenges and to make full use of the opportunities. In this way, we are going to really embark on a long-term development journey featuring sustainability. Please stay tuned and keep paying attention to Hongqiao International Economic Forum. And finally, I would like to wish everything well to all of you here, and please enjoy your stay here in Shanghai and in today's event.